7 years of lies, one perfect kingdom, and tonight, everything burns. Alpha King Darius Thorn built his empire on strength, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond with his Luna. But when a 13-year-old boy appears at the palace gates carrying the royal bloodline mark on his wrist, the truth he buried comes clawing back from the grave. Some secrets don't just destroy marriages, they shatter kingdoms. Stay until the end to see how far a king will fall to protect what he never knew he had. And if this story grabs you by the throat, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my pack is watching from. The storm hit Silver Fang territory like a fist through glass. Rain hammered the palace windows in sheets so thick the guards could barely see 10 feet beyond the walls. Lightning split the sky over the training grounds, illuminating the ancient stone corridors in bursts of white fire. Inside the throne room, Alpha King Darius Thorn stood before the massive northern window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the tempest tear through his kingdom like it had a personal grudge. He didn't mind storms. They reminded him of war, of the blood he'd spilled to claim this throne 7 years ago, of the enemies he'd crushed beneath his boots until every rival pack from the Silver Mountains to the Ashwood border bent the knee or died trying. But tonight, something felt wrong. The air tasted like copper and ash. His wolf paced restless circles inside his chest, clawing at his ribs like it wanted out. And Darius had learned a long time ago never to ignore his wolf when it got like this. Behind him, Luna Celine sat in her throne, reading through the latest reports from the Eastern Territories. Even now, after 7 years of marriage, she carried herself like a weapon sheathed in silk. Dark hair pulled back severe, eyes sharp enough to gut a man at 20 paces. She was beautiful the way a blade was beautiful, deadly, precise, unforgiving. She glanced up from the parchment, catching his reflection in the rain-streaked glass. "What is it?" Her voice cut through the storm noise without rising above a murmur. That was Celine. She didn't need to shout to command a room. Darius shook his head. "Nothing. Just restless." "You're lying." He turned to face her, mouth quirking into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And you're too damn perceptive for your own good. It's kept us alive this long." She set the parchment aside, leaning back in her throne with that calculating look she got when she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. "What does your wolf sense?" "I don't know." He crossed to the table where a map of the kingdom lay, spread beneath glass weights shaped like wolves. "But something's coming." Before Celine could respond, the doors to the throne room slammed open hard enough to crack against the stone walls. Captain Ridian stood in the entrance, water streaming off his armor, chest heaving like he'd run the entire length of the palace. His face was pale. Not the kind of pale you got from cold rain, the kind you got from fear. Darius felt his wolf surge forward, eyes flashing gold. "Speak." "My king." Ridian's voice shook. "There's a boy at the gates. He's asking for you by name." Celine rose from her throne in one fluid motion, crossing to stand beside Darius. "A boy. In this storm. Alone." "Yes, Luna. And you opened my gates for a child without protocol. Because why exactly?" Ridian swallowed hard. "Because he has the bloodline mark, Luna. On his wrist, clear as day." The room went silent except for the rain hammering the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Darius felt the floor tilt beneath his boots, felt the air go thin in his lungs. Impossible. But even as he said it, even as Celine's eyes snapped to his face with a look that could freeze blood, Darius felt the cold truth settling into his bones like frost. Not impossible, just buried. "Bring him in," Darius said, voice flat. "Now." The boy who entered the throne room 60 seconds later looked like he'd crawled out of a grave, soaked to the bone. Mud caked on his boots and trousers, dark hair plastered to a face too gaunt for 13, cheekbones sharp beneath skin pale from cold and exhaustion. But his eyes burned with something Darius recognized immediately because he saw it every morning in his own mirror. The Thorn bloodline didn't produce weak sons. The guards flanked the boy on either side, hands on their weapons, but the kid didn't seem to notice or care. He stood in the center of the throne room, dripping rainwater onto ancient stone, staring straight at Darius with the kind of intensity that made grown men look away first. Celine moved before Darius could speak, descending the dais steps with lethal grace. She stopped 3 feet from the boy, head tilted, studying him like a predator deciding whether something was prey or threat. "You have a name," she said. "Kyle." The boy's voice didn't waver. "Kyle Arden. And you claim bloodline to this house." "I don't claim anything." Kale reached for his left sleeve, pushing the soaked fabric up to his elbow. "I am bloodline." The mark blazed across his inner wrist in silver and black ink. The thorn crest, the 3-pointed crown wrapped in thorns and wolf fangs. Impossible to fake. Impossible to forge. The kind of mark that appeared on royal blood and royal blood only, burning itself into the skin the moment a child hit their first shift. Darius felt his knees go weak. Selena went very, very still. When she spoke again, her voice could have cut diamonds. "How?" Kale's jaw tightened. "Ask him." Every head in the room turned toward the dais, toward Darius, and suddenly the throne room felt like a cage closing in from all sides. "Everyone out," Darius said quietly. "My king," Rydian started. I said out. "Now." The guards exchanged glances but obeyed, filing through the doors and pulling them shut with a boom that echoed through the vast chamber like a death knell. Only Celine remained, standing between Darius and the boy, arms crossed, eyes burning with a fury so cold it made the storm outside look warm. "Explain," she said. "And choose your words very carefully, husband, because right now I'm deciding whether to let you finish speaking before I rip your throat out." Darius descended the dais steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. He kept his eyes on Kyle, searching the boy's face for traces of the woman he'd tried so hard to forget. And there they were, in the shape of his mouth, the set of his shoulders, the defiant tilt of his chin. Mira. Her name tasted like ash and regret. 8 years ago, Darius said, voice rough, before Celine and I bonded, before I took the throne. There was a woman from the Ashwood pack. We were. He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't make it worse. Involved. Involved. Celine's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. Is that what we're calling betrayal now? It wasn't betrayal. We weren't bonded yet. No. Just promised. Just destined. Just politically essential to the survival of both our territories. She took a step toward him, power crackling in the air around her like static before lightning. But please, continue. Tell me about this woman you were involved with while our fathers were negotiating our marriage contract. Darius met her eyes, refusing to look away. It lasted 3 months. Then I ended it. I told her it was over, that I had responsibilities, a kingdom to claim, and I never saw her again. Clearly you saw her at least once more, Celine said, gesturing toward Kyle without breaking eye contact. No. Darius shook his head. I swear to you, Celine, after I ended things, I never spoke to her, never contacted her. I thought she'd moved on, found someone else in her pack. I had no idea there was a child. Kyle's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She didn't want you to know. Both Darius and Celine turned to stare at the boy. She told me everything before she died, Kyle continued, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. About who you were, what you'd become. She said you had a destiny bigger than her, bigger than us. So she hid me, raised me alone in the Ashwood territory under her family name, told everyone my father died in a border raid before I was born. Why come here now? Celine demanded. Why show up in the middle of a storm 13 years later if your mother wanted you hidden? Because 2 weeks ago, someone tried to kill me. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward into dangerous territory. Darius felt his wolf surge forward, a growl building in his chest. Who? I don't know. Kale pulled his sleeve down, covering the bloodline mark. But my mother did. She told me before she died that the attack wasn't random, that someone in this kingdom knew about me, knew I existed, and wanted me dead before I could ever claim my birthright. She's dead, Darius said quietly. Your mother. Kale's composure cracked for the first time, pain flashing across his face before he shoved it down behind that wall of defiance. 3 days ago. The same people who tried to kill me came back. This time they didn't fail. The throne room went silent except for the storm and the sound of Darius's heart slamming against his ribs like it wanted to break through bone. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Sorry doesn't bring her back." Kael's voice hardened. "And it doesn't tell me who's trying to bury your mistakes before they ruin your perfect kingdom." Celine moved so fast Darius almost didn't see it. One moment she was standing 3 feet from Kael. The next she had the boy by the collar, lifting him onto his toes, eyes blazing gold with wolf fire. "Watch your mouth," she hissed. "You don't walk into this palace and insult your king." "He's not my king," Kael shot back. And Darius saw the exact moment Celine decided whether to respect the kid's backbone or snap it. She chose respect. Barely. Releasing Kael with a shove that sent him stumbling back, Celine turned to Darius with an expression that promised this conversation was far from over. "We need to verify his claim. The mark is verification enough. Marks can be faked with the right magic." "Not thorn marks," Darius said. "You know that." "I know what I see." Celine's voice dropped to something dangerous. "And what I see is a boy who appeared out of nowhere with a convenient story and a mark that could mean anything. Until we have proof beyond ink and desperation, he's a potential threat. He's my son." The words came out before Darius could stop them, hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Celine's face went carefully blank. The kind of blank that meant she was feeling everything and showing nothing. When she spoke again, her voice was ice over steel. "Then I suggest you figure out who wants him dead, husband. Because if someone is hunting royal blood, they won't stop at a bastard son. They'll come for all of us." She turned on her heel and strode toward the doors, power radiating off her in waves that made the torches flicker. "Celine." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't know," Darius said quietly. "I swear to you, I didn't know." "No." Celine looked back over her shoulder, and the pain in her eyes hit harder than any blow she could have landed. "You just didn't care enough to find out." Then she was gone, the doors slamming shut behind her with a finality that echoed through Darius's chest like the closing of a coffin lid. The boy stood in the center of the throne room, still dripping rainwater, watching Darius with those burning eyes. "She's going to hate you for a while," Kael said. "Yeah." Darius sank onto the edge of the dais, suddenly exhausted. "I know. You deserve it. I know that too." Kael crossed his arms, posture defensive but voice uncertain. "So what happens now? You send me away. Pretend I don't exist. Keep your perfect kingdom intact." Darius looked up in this boy, this son he'd never known, this piece of himself he'd abandoned without ever meaning to, and made the only choice he could live with. "No. You stay. We figure out who tried to kill you, and we keep you alive long enough to decide what comes next. Just like that. Just like that." Kael studied him for a long moment, suspicion and hope warring across his face. "Why?" "Because someone murdered your mother and tried to end your life before it barely started." Darius rose to his feet, alpha power flooding his voice. "And I don't care if you're my blood or a stranger off the street. Nobody hunts children in my kingdom and lives to brag about it." The conviction in those words seemed to reach something in Kael, because the boy's shoulders finally dropped an inch, exhaustion replacing defiance. "I haven't slept in 3 days," he admitted quietly. Darius called for the guards, issuing orders to prepare a room in the guest wing and post protection outside the door. As Rydian led Kael toward the exit, the boy paused at the threshold. "My mother loved you," he said without looking back. Even after everything, she never stopped. Then he was gone, leaving Darius alone in the throne room with ghosts and regrets and the taste of ash in his mouth. Celine didn't return to their chambers that night. Darius found her in the war room 3 hours past midnight, staring at maps by candlelight, a bottle of whiskey half empty on the table beside her. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. He took the chair across from her, waiting. 7 years, she finally said. 7 years I've stood beside you, fought beside you, bled for this kingdom while you built your legend. And in one night, I find out it was all built on lies, not lies." Darius reached for the whiskey, took a drink straight from the bottle. "Omissions, semantics, no. Truth." He set the bottle down hard enough to rattle the map weights. "I never lied to you, Celine. About Mira. About anything. You never asked about my past before we bonded, and I never offered because it was over, dead, buried, except it wasn't dead. Celine finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes made him wish she'd just hit him instead. It was breathing, growing, walking around with your eyes and your mother's mouth, waiting to show up and destroy everything we built. He's 13 years old. He's proof you love someone else. The words hung between them, raw and bleeding. I didn't love her, Darius said quietly. I wanted her. Needed the distraction from the pressure of becoming king, but I didn't love her. Not the way I. He stopped. Because some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud when the wounds were this fresh. Celine stood abruptly, crossing to the window. Rain still hammered the glass, though the worst of the storm had passed. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what they'll say? The nobles, the council, the rival packs. That I'm weak, that we're weak. She turned to face him. That the great Alpha King couldn't keep his secrets buried. That the powerful Luna couldn't keep her husband satisfied. They'll circle like vultures, Darius, looking for any crack in our armor, any weakness to exploit. Then we don't show weakness. We're standing in it. Celine gestured toward the door, toward the guest wing where Kale slept under guard. That boy is weakness made flesh. That boy is my son. I know. The admission seemed to cost her something vital, and that's what makes this so dangerous. She crossed back to the table, bracing her hands on the edge, head bowed. Darius wanted to reach for her, pull her close, promise it would be okay. But he'd used up his right to easy comfort the moment Kael walked through those doors. We verify his story, Celine said finally, voice steady again. We investigate his mother's death. We find out who's hunting him and why. And we do it quietly, before every pack from here to the coast hears about the king's bastard son showing up in the middle of the night. He's not a bastard. Celine's eyes flashed. He was born outside our bond. Outside any bond. That makes him exactly what he is, no matter how much you want to pretty it up with royal blood. He didn't choose this. Neither did I. She straightened, pulling her armor back into place. But we both have to live with it now. So here's what's going to happen. The boy stays in the guest wing, under guard. No public appearances. No introduction to the court. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Agreed. And you, she continued, voice hardening, sleep in your own chambers until I decide I can stand to look at you without wanting to set something on fire. The words hit like a physical blow, but Darius just nodded. Understood. Celine moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. One more thing. What? If this tears our kingdom apart, if this gives our enemies the opening they've been waiting for, I will never forgive you. Not for the affair, not for the child, but for being careless enough to let it destroy what we built. Then she was gone, leaving Darius alone with the maps and the whiskey and the crushing weight of choices made years ago coming home to roost. Then, Kael woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of food he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Forgot about the storm and the journey and the terrifying gamble of walking into the Silverfang Palace and demanding an audience with a king who didn't know he existed. Then he saw the guard posted outside his door and remembered everything. A servant brought breakfast, eggs, meat, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, more food than Kael had seen in a week. He ate like a starving animal because that's what he was. Starving, exhausted, terrified, but alive. That counted for something. He was washing his face in the basin when the door opened and Captain Redian stepped inside, expression neutral, but eyes sharp. The king wants to see you, Redian said. Now. Kael dried his hands on a towel, heart hammering. Is that good or bad? Depends on what you tell him. They walked through corridors that seemed designed to remind visitors exactly how powerful the Silverfang Kingdom was. Tapestries depicting ancient victories, weapons mounted on walls, stone floors worn smooth by generations of wolves who'd ruled these lands with fang and claw. Kael kept his head up, refusing to be intimidated. His mother had raised him better than that. The king's private study was smaller than the throne room, but somehow more imposing. Books lined the walls. Maps covered every available surface. And standing behind a massive oak desk, backlit by the morning sun, was Alpha King Darius Thorn. He looked different in daylight, older, more human. The kind of man who'd earned every scar and learned to live with the weight of them. Sit, Darius said, gesturing to a chair. Kale sat, hands gripped tight in his lap to keep them from shaking. Darius studied him for a long moment, then pulled a leather journal from his desk drawer and slid it across the polished wood. Your mother kept records, he said. Names, dates, everything that happened between us. She sent it to a contact in the capital with instructions to deliver it to me if anything ever happened to her. Kale stared at the journal like it might bite. She never told me. She was protecting you. Darius tapped the cover. According to this, someone in my court knew about you within months of your birth. Someone who wanted you gone before you could threaten their position. Who? She didn't know. But she had suspicions. Darius flipped the journal open to a page marked with red ribbon. Lord Magnus Reeve, Celine's senior advisor. He was the one who first suggested our marriage alliance, the one who pushed hardest for the bonding ceremony to happen quickly. Kale felt ice slide down his spine. You think he's trying to kill me? I think someone wants the Thorn bloodline weak and divided. And Magnus has spent 7 years positioning himself as the most powerful man in this kingdom outside of Celine and myself. So what do? We investigate. Carefully. Quietly. Darius closed the journal. But first you need to understand something. If Magnus is behind this, if he spent 13 years planning to use you as a weapon against this throne, then everyone you trust is suspect. Everyone you've met since your mother died. Even the people who helped you get here. Kale's throat went tight. I came alone. No one comes 500 miles through hostile territory alone at 13. Who helped you? He didn't want to answer, didn't want to put more people in danger, but the look in Darius's eyes said lying wasn't an option. A tracker named Silas, Kale admitted, from my mother's pack. He gave me supplies, showed me the safest routes, and you trust him. My mother trusted him. That's not what I asked. Kale met the king's eyes, trying to read the man who was apparently his father. I don't trust anyone anymore. But Silas never asked questions, never wanted anything. He just helped. Darius nodded slowly. I'll have someone check him out. Discreetly. A knock at the door made them both turn. Celine entered without waiting for permission, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. We have a problem, she said, ignoring Kale entirely. The council is demanding a formal audience. They've heard rumors about the boy. Already. Darius's jaw tightened. How? Does it matter? Celine crossed to the desk, movements sharp with barely controlled fury. Someone talked. Someone always talks. And now we have approximately 4 hours before I have to stand in front of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom and explain why my husband's secret son is sleeping in my palace. Our palace, Darius said quietly. Is it? Celine's eyes flashed. Because right now it feels like I'm the only one trying to hold it together while you play happy family with the living proof of your betrayal. That's not fair. Fair. Celine laughed, sharp and bitter. You want to talk about fair? Let's discuss fairness over breakfast while I explain to our allies why they should still trust us. Why they should still believe in the strength of this kingdom when its king couldn't even keep track of his own bloodline. The words hit Darius like physical blows, but before he could respond, Kale stood up. This is my fault, he said quietly. Both adults turned to stare at him. I shouldn't have come here, Kale continued, voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. I should have died with my mother. Would have been cleaner, easier for everyone. Sit down, Darius ordered. No. Kale backed toward the door. I'll leave. Go back to Ashwood. Disappear. You can tell the council it was a mistake. A fraud. That you sent the imposter away. Celine moved faster than Kyle expected, blocking the door with her body. Her eyes blazed gold with wolf fire, power crackling in the air around her. You're not running, she said, voice deadly soft. Because whether I like it or not, you're here now. And if you run, if you show weakness, every enemy we have will know exactly how to break us. I don't understand. Weakness is blood in the water. Celine leaned close enough that Kyle could see the pain and fury and terrible resolve burning behind those golden eyes. And we don't bleed. Not for anyone. Not even for you. She straightened, looking past Kyle to Darius. The council meets at noon, she said. The boy stays here until we decide how to play this. Lock him in if you have to. Then she was gone, door slamming shut with enough force to rattle the books on their shelves. Kyle sank back into the chair, hands shaking. She hates me. She hates the situation. Darius rounded the desk, crouching in front of Kyle so they were eye level. And she's terrified. Because everything she said is true. You're not just a secret, Kyle. You're ammunition. And in the wrong hands, you could destroy everything she's spent 7 years building. So what do I do? Survive. Darius gripped Kyle's shoulder, the gesture awkward but genuine. Survive long enough for us to find who's hunting you. Survive long enough to prove you're not a weapon. Survive long enough to decide whether you want to be part of this family or walk away from it entirely. And if I want to walk away, Darius's grip tightened. Then I'll make sure you can, but not until the threat is gone. Not until I know you'll make it past the border alive. Kyle searched his father's face, looking for lies, finding only grim determination and something that might have been regret. Why do you care? He asked. You didn't know I existed until last night. No, but you exist now. And whatever mistakes I made 13 years ago, however badly I failed your mother, I'm not failing you. The word should have meant something, should have filled the hollow space in Kyle's chest where a father was supposed to be, but all he felt was tired and afraid, and desperately, dangerously alone in a palace full of people who wanted him gone. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, stone walls carved with the names of every alpha who'd ruled the Silverfang kingdom for the past 3 centuries. And at the center, a circular table where the most powerful nobles in the realm gathered to advise their king, or challenge him. Darius entered first, Celine at his side, both dressed in formal court attire that screamed power and unity even if the reality was currently held together with spite and necessity. The council rose as they entered. 12 nobles representing the major pacts and territories. Old money, old blood, old grudges dressed up as loyalty. And standing at the far end of the table, hands clasped behind his back like he owned the room, was Lord Magnus Reeve. Tall, silver-haired, distinguished in the way snakes were distinguished right before they struck. He'd served as Celine's advisor since before the bonding, appointed by her father to ensure the Luna had someone she could trust in a court full of potential enemies. He smiled as Darius took his seat, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. My king, my Luna. Lord Marcus bowed his head in a gesture that managed to be respectful and mocking at the same time. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. We weren't certain you'd have time given your unexpected guest. The other nobles shifted, tension crackling through the room like electricity before a storm. Celine spoke before Darius could. Let's not waste time on pleasantries, Magnus. You demanded this audience. State your concern. Magnus's smile widened. My concern, Luna, is the rumor spreading through this palace like wildfire. A rumor that claims a boy arrived at our gates last night bearing the Thorn bloodline mark and making claims of royal heritage. It's not a rumor, Darius said flatly. He's here. And the mark is genuine. The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Thane, a sharp-eyed noble from the Eastern Territories, was the first to speak. You're claiming the boy is your son. I'm not claiming anything. Darius met her gaze without flinching. He is my son, born before my bonding to Luna Celine, hidden by his mother to protect him from enemies within this court. And you expect us to simply accept this? Lord Voss, an older noble with more scars than patience, leaned forward, to welcome a bastard into the royal family without question. Careful, Celine said softly, and everyone in the room felt the threat beneath the word. You're speaking about my husband's blood. Choose your next words wisely. Voss had the sense to look nervous, but Magnus stepped smoothly into the gap. No one questions the king's bloodline, Luna, but surely you understand our concern. A child appearing from nowhere, claiming royal heritage. It raises questions about security, about succession, about who else might have access to information we believed secure. He's 13 years old, Darius said. Not a spy. No. Magnus's expression shifted to something that looked almost sympathetic. Just a child caught in the mistakes of adults, which is why we must ask the difficult questions now, before sentiment clouds judgment. Ask them. Very well. Magnus clasped his hands on the table, every inch the concerned advisor. Who knew about this boy before last night? Who helped him reach the palace? Who verified his claim beyond a mark that, with enough skilled magic, could potentially be forged? The mark can't be forged. Everything can be forged with the right tools and the right motivation. Magnus looked around the table, making sure every noble was paying attention. I'm not suggesting the boy is lying. I'm suggesting someone may be using him as a weapon, as a distraction, as a way to destabilize this kingdom from within. And there it was, the poison wrapped in reason, the suggestion that Kael was a threat without directly calling him one. Darius felt his wolf surge forward, power flooding his voice. You think I can't recognize my own blood? I think grief makes people see what they want to see. Magnus's tone remained perfectly measured. The boy's mother is dead. He's alone, desperate. And someone may have taken advantage of that desperation to create a crisis exactly when we need stability most. What crisis? Celine demanded. We're at peace. Are we? Magnus pulled a sealed letter from his jacket, sliding it across the table. This arrived from the northern border this morning. The Ironwood Pack is mobilizing. They've increased patrols, reinforced their defenses. They're preparing for something. Darius broke the seal, scanning the contents. His blood went cold. They know, he said quietly. About the boy. Magnus nodded. Someone told them. And now they're watching, waiting to see if this kingdom shows weakness, if the Alpha King is distracted, if the royal family is divided. Celine snatched the letter from Darius's hand, reading it herself. Her jaw tightened with each line. This doesn't prove the boy is false, she said. No, but it proves his arrival has consequences. Magnus leaned back, letting the implication hang in the air. The question isn't whether the boy is truly royal blood. The question is whether we can afford to acknowledge him while our enemies are circling. Lady Thane spoke up again. If the Ironwood Pack thinks we're weak, they'll test the borders. And if the borders fall? They won't fall, Darius cut in, because we're not weak, and we're not divided. Then prove it. Lord Voss crossed his arms. Send the boy away, quietly, before this situation spirals beyond control. No. The single word echoed through the council chamber like a thunderclap. Celine turned to stare at Darius, surprise flashing across her face before she could hide it. He's my son, Darius said, standing, and he stays. We'll investigate his mother's death. We'll find whoever's behind the threats against him, and we'll do it without abandoning royal blood because it's politically inconvenient. You're making a mistake, Magnus said quietly, one that could cost us everything. Then I'll pay the price. Darius looked around the table, meeting each noble's eyes in turn. But I won't abandon family, not for politics, not for appearances, not for anyone. The room erupted in argument. Nobles shouting over each other, accusations flying, lines being drawn in the sand. And through it all, Magnus sat perfectly still, watching with those cold eyes. Waiting. Celine rose to her feet, power exploding through the room in a wave that made every wolf present drop their gaze and bare their throats in instinctive submission. Enough, she said, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. We're done here. Luna, Magnus started. I said we're done. Celine's eyes blazed gold. You've made your concerns known. The king has made his decision. If any of you have a problem with it, you're welcome to challenge him for the throne. Otherwise, this meeting is over. No one moved. No one was stupid enough to challenge an Alpha King with Celine Vale standing beside him. Celine turned and walked out, Darius following. They made it 3 steps down the corridor before she rounded on him. What were you thinking? She hissed. You just painted a target on all our backs. I was thinking I'm not letting Magnus manipulate me into abandoning my son. Your son. Celine's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You mean the weapon Magnus just used to fracture our council and give our enemies exactly the opening they've been waiting for? You think I don't see it? Darius grabbed her arm, pulling her into an alcove where the guards couldn't overhear. I know what he's doing. He wants me weak, wants us fighting, wants the kingdom destabilized so he can step in and play savior. Then why give him exactly what he wants? Because the alternative is worse. Darius met her eyes, willing her to understand. If I send Kyle away, if I deny him, it proves Magnus right. Proves I'm weak. Proves my own guilt means more than honor. And keeping him proves you're too sentimental to rule. No. Darius's grip tightened. It proves I'm exactly the kind of king who won't sacrifice innocence for political gain, the kind who protects blood, the kind our allies can trust. Celine stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. You're betting everything on that boy, she said finally. Our kingdom, our marriage, everything. I'm betting on the truth. Darius released her arm, stepping back, and trusting that when the dust settles, you'll still be standing beside me. Don't be so sure. She walked away, leaving Darius alone in the alcove with the weight of the entire kingdom pressing down on his shoulders. Cale heard the shouting before anyone opened the door. Not words, just raised voices. Anger, fear, the sound of a kingdom tearing itself apart. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripped tight in his lap, and waited for the guards to come tell him it was over, that they were sending him away, that his gamble had failed, and his mother's death would mean nothing. When the door finally opened, it wasn't guards. It was Celine. She stood in the doorway, backlit by corridor torchlight, expression unreadable. Come with me, she said. Cale stood slowly. Where? Somewhere we can talk. Without my husband. Without the guards. Just you and me. That sounded like the setup to a quiet execution, but Cale followed anyway because refusing a Luna was a good way to make the execution significantly less quiet. They walked through the palace in silence, taking servant corridors and back staircases, until they emerged in a private garden overlooking the training grounds. Rain from the storm still dripped from the trees, making the whole space smell like wet earth and stone. Celine stopped at the edge of the garden wall, staring out over the grounds where young wolves were running drills under Captain Rydian's watchful eye. I should hate you, she said quietly. Cale swallowed hard. I know. You're proof my husband loved someone before me. That I wasn't his first choice. Just his political necessity. He didn't love her. How would you know? Because my mother told me. Cale moved to stand beside Celine, keeping a careful distance. She told me everything before she died. About how it started. How it ended. How he walked away without looking back. And you believed her. I believed she wouldn't lie to me with her last breath. Celine was quiet for a long moment, watching the young wolves train. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I don't hate you, she admitted. I hate the situation. I hate that you're here. I hate that your existence threatens everything I've built. But I don't hate you. Cale felt something loosen in his chest. Okay, but I don't trust you either. Celine turned to face him, eyes sharp. Someone wanted you dead. Someone powerful enough to have you hunted across 500 miles of territory. And until we know who and why, you're not just a lost son. You're a threat. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a scared kid who doesn't understand the game he just walked into. Celine leaned against the wall, arms crossed. This isn't a story, Kyle. This isn't some legend where the hidden prince returns and everything works out. This is politics, power, blood, and people will use you, hurt you, kill you without a second thought if it serves their purpose. So what do I do? Stop being prey. Celine's eyes flashed gold. Stop waiting for someone to save you. If you're going to survive in this palace, you need to understand the rules. Trust no one. Question everything. And never, ever show weakness. That's a lonely way to live. It's the only way to live when you're royal blood in a kingdom full of wolves. Cale studied her, seeing past the armor to the woman beneath. You're scared too, terrified. Celine didn't bother denying it, because I've spent 7 years building something that matters, something bigger than myself. And in one night, all of it could burn because my husband couldn't keep his past buried. I'm sorry, don't apologize. Celine pushed off the wall, moving closer. Apologizing is weakness. If you want to survive here, if you want to prove you're more than just a mistake someone wants erased, then stop being sorry and start being useful. How? Help us find who's hunting you. Celine's voice hardened. Your mother kept records. She had suspicions. You know things we don't. So stop hiding in that room feeling sorry for yourself and start fighting. Cale felt something shift inside him, something that felt almost like hope. Okay, he said. What do you need? Everything. Names, faces, anyone your mother mentioned in the months before she died, anyone who asked questions, anyone who seemed too interested in your whereabouts. There was someone. Kale frowned, trying to remember. A man from the capital. He came to our settlement about 2 months ago. Said he was looking for rare herbs only our pack gathered. Name. Mother never said, but she didn't trust him. Told me to stay out of sight whenever he was around. Celine's eyes narrowed. Description. Tall, silver hair, expensive clothes. Talked like a noble pretending not to be. Magnus. Celine's voice went deadly quiet. It has to be. You know him. He's my senior advisor, the man I'm supposed to trust above everyone except my husband. Celine's hands clenched into fists. And if he's behind this, if he's been planning this for months or years, we need proof, Kale said. Not just suspicions. No. We need to keep you alive long enough to get proof. Celine grabbed his arm, gripped tight enough to bruise. Which means from now on, you don't leave the palace. You don't talk to anyone I haven't vetted. You don't trust anyone. Not even Darius. Why not him? Because love makes people stupid. Celine released him, stepping back. And right now, we can't afford stupid. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, she said without looking back. If this goes wrong, if Magnus or whoever's behind this gets to you before we stop them, don't die quietly. Make noise. Make it messy. Make sure everyone knows who killed you and why. Because if you're going down, you're taking them with you. Then she was gone, leaving Kyle alone in the garden with the sound of young wolves training and the terrible understanding that he'd walked into a war that had been waiting for him since the day he was born. Chak. Night fell over Silverfang territory like a hammer. Darius stood in his private chambers, staring at the journal Mira had kept. Her handwriting covered every page, neat, precise, recording every moment of their brief affair like evidence for a trial. And in a way, it was. He flipped to the last entry, dated 3 weeks before her death. Someone is watching us. I can feel it, eyes in the shadows. Footsteps that stop when I turn around. Kyle feels it too, though he pretends he doesn't. He's gotten so good at pretending, at being invisible, at surviving in a world that wants him erased. I should have told Darius years ago, should have given him the choice. But I was afraid. Afraid he'd take Kyle away. Afraid he'd reject us both. Afraid the kingdom would tear my son apart before he had a chance to live. Now I'm afraid I waited too long. If something happens to me, if the shadows finally catch up, I pray this journal reaches him. I pray he's strong enough to protect our son when I can't. I pray he's become the man I believed he could be. And I pray Kyle forgives me for all of it. The words blurred as Darius's vision went hot. He'd failed her, failed to protect her, failed to even know she needed protecting. A knock at the door pulled him back from the edge. Enter. Captain Ridian stepped inside, expression grim. My king, we have a situation. Darius closed the journal carefully. What kind of situation? A fire. In the Ashwood settlement where the boy's mother lived. Started an hour ago. Witnesses say it began in the healer's quarters. Where Mira lived. Ridian's jaw tightened. By the time our scouts arrived, the entire building was ash, along with any records or evidence that might have been inside. Convenient. Too convenient. Ridian stepped closer, lowering his voice. My king, I've served you since you took the throne, fought beside you, bled for this kingdom, and I'm telling you now, someone is cleaning up loose ends. Fast. Magnus, I don't have proof. But the timing, the precision. Someone knew exactly what to burn and when. Darius felt his wolf surge forward, rage flooding his veins. Is the boy safe? Under guard. Celine posted her own people outside his room. No one gets in or out without her permission. Good. Darius crossed to the window, looking out over his kingdom, over the palace walls and the territories beyond where wolves lived and died according to the whims of those in power. And I want eyes on Magnus. Every move, every conversation, every damn breath. Carefully, Ridian cautioned. If he suspects we're watching, then he'll make a mistake. Darius turned back to his captain. And when he does, we'll be ready. Ridian bowed and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Darius stood alone in his chambers, journal clutched in one hand, and made a promise to the woman he'd loved and lost and failed. I'll keep him safe, even if it costs me everything, even if it burns this kingdom to the ground. I'll keep him safe. Lutetjan. 2 floors below, Magnus Reeves sat in his private study, reading a letter by candlelight. The boy survived. The mother is dead. The evidence is destroyed. But the situation is escalating faster than anticipated. The Alpha King is attached. The Luna is suspicious. The Council is divided. Recommend accelerating the timeline. Move to Phase 3 immediately. Magnus set the letter down, lips curving into a smile that would have made a corpse look warm. Perfect. He pulled out fresh parchment and began writing orders, names, targets, contingencies. Everything he'd spent 13 years building was finally falling into place. And when the dust settled, when the Thorn bloodline was nothing but ash and memory, he would step into the power vacuum and reshape the kingdom exactly as he'd always intended. Strong, unified, ruthless, under his control. All he had to do was make sure one scared 13-year-old boy never lived long enough to threaten it. In his guarded room, Kael couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the guards pace outside his door, and thought about his mother, about the way she'd looked at him in those final moments. Scared, sorry, desperate for him to understand. "They'll come for you," she'd whispered, "but you're stronger than they know, stronger than even you know. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them erase you. Fight." And he would, whatever it took, whatever it cost. He'd survive long enough to find who killed her, and then he'd make them pay. 3 days after the fire in Ashwood, Kael learned what it meant to be hunted inside a palace full of wolves. Not with blades or poison, those were too obvious, too easy to trace back to the hand that wielded them. No. This was the kind of hunting that happened in whispers and sidelong glances. In servants who suddenly found reasons to avoid his corridor. In guards who changed shifts without warning. In the suffocating weight of eyes that followed him everywhere but vanished the moment he turned around. He felt it like pressure against his skull. Constant, inescapable, and getting worse by the hour. Captain Rydian escorted him through the palace corridors toward the training grounds, silent except for the rhythm of boots on stone. Kael had stopped trying to make conversation 2 days ago when he realized the captain wasn't there to be friendly, just to make sure he didn't end up with a knife between his ribs before someone decided what to do with him. They emerged into morning sunlight that felt too bright after days spent mostly in his room. The training yard stretched before them, packed dirt worn smooth by generations of young wolves learning to fight. About 20 of them were out there now, paired off in combat drills while an instructor barked corrections. They all stopped when Kael appeared. Just stopped mid-swing, mid-block, mid-breath, and stared. "Ignore them," Rydian muttered. "Easy for you to say." The instructor, a scarred woman with iron-gray hair pulled back tight enough to hurt, crossed the yard in 4 long strides. Her eyes raked over Kael, like she was deciding which parts to carve off first. "This the bastard," she said to Rydian. "Not a question. This is Kael Arden, under the king's protection. He's to train with the others." "Like hell." The instructor spat in the dirt. "I don't train royal mistakes. Those weren't my orders." "Then get different orders." The woman turned her back on both of them, addressing the watching trainees. "Back to work. All of you. Unless you want to run laps until you puke." The young wolves scrambled back to their drills, but the damage was done. Kael felt the rejection like a physical blow, hot shame crawling up his neck. Rydian's jaw tightened. "Commander Vera, you will follow the king's directive, or I'll have you explaining your refusal to him personally." Vara turned back slowly, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. "You do that. And while you're at it, ask him how he expects me to train a boy who's never held a weapon without getting the real fighters killed in the process. He can learn, not fast enough to matter." Vera crossed her arms. "This isn't a charity house, Captain. It's a combat yard, and I don't have time to babysit while our enemies sharpen their teeth." Before Rydian could respond, a voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "Then perhaps you have time to explain your insubordination to your Luna." Everyone turned. Celine stood at the edge of the training yard, power radiating off her in waves that made every wolf present drop their eyes and bare their throats without thinking. She wore training leathers instead of court finery, hair braided back for violence, and the look on her face could have frozen blood. Vara dropped to one knee, head bowed. "Luna, I meant no disrespect, didn't you? Celine crossed the yard with lethal grace, stopping 3 feet from the kneeling woman. Because it sounded to me like you just refused a direct order from your Alpha King. In front of witnesses, during a time when unity is essential to our survival. The boy is untrained. Vera kept her eyes down. A liability. So train him. Celine's voice dropped to something deadly soft. Or admit you're not skilled enough to turn raw potential into a weapon, and I'll find someone who is. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Vera's shoulders went rigid, pride and fury warring with survival instinct. When she finally spoke, the words came out ground between teeth. I can train him. Good. Celine gestured sharply. Then do it, starting now. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back over her shoulder at Kael. Try not to die on your first day, she said. It would be inconvenient. Then she was gone, leaving Kael standing in a training yard full of wolves who hated him and an instructor who looked like she'd rather break his neck than teach him. Vera rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knee. She studied Kael with eyes that had seen too many battles and too few reasons to be merciful. You ever held a sword before? She asked. No. A knife. For eating. Perfect. Vera grabbed a training blade from the weapons rack, tossing it at Kael's feet. Pick it up. Kael bent down, wrapping his fingers around the leather-wrapped hilt. The blade was wooden but weighted to feel real, heavy, awkward in his unpracticed grip. Wrong, Vera said immediately. Thumb along the spine, wrist straight, elbow in. Kael adjusted his grip, trying to mirror the instruction. Still wrong. Vera moved behind him, kicking his feet wider apart. Lower center of gravity, knees bent. You're not standing in a drawing room, you're preparing for someone to try and kill you. She grabbed his sword arm, yanking it higher. Like this. Drive up from the legs. Core engaged. Power comes from the whole body, not just your arm. Her hands were calloused and rough, adjusting his posture with the kind of roughness that said she didn't care if it hurt. Kael gritted his teeth and took it, because complaining would just prove her right. Now, hold that position, Vera ordered, stepping back. Until I tell you to move. How long? Until your muscles scream and your mind begs you to quit. Then twice that. She walked away, addressing the other trainees while Kael stood frozen in position, blade extended, thighs already starting to burn. Minutes crawled by like hours. His shoulders screamed, his wrists shook, sweat dripped into his eyes, and he couldn't wipe it away without breaking position. Around him, the other trainees went through their drills, shooting him looks that ranged from pity to contempt. None of them spoke to him. None of them offered help. He was alone. Just like always. By the time Vera finally called for a break, Kael's entire body was trembling. He lowered the sword, gasping, and his legs nearly gave out. Pathetic, Vera announced to the yard. But at least you didn't quit. She tossed him a water skin. Drink. You've got 5 minutes before we start again. Kael caught the skin clumsily, gulping water that tasted like salvation. Around him, the other trainees clustered in groups, talking low and shooting glances his direction. A boy about Kael's age broke from one of the groups, crossing over with the kind of swagger that meant trouble. He was bigger than Kael, broader, the kind of kid who'd been training since he could walk and knew it. So you're the king's mistake, the boy said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kael lowered the water skin slowly. I have a name. Don't care. The boy circled him like a predator. My father says you're going to get us all killed. Says the Ironwood pack is watching for weakness, and you're handing it to them on a silver plate. Your father talks too much. The boy's eyes flashed. What did you say? Kael straightened despite the exhaustion singing through every muscle. I said your father talks too much. If the Ironwood pack is that dangerous, maybe he should spend less time gossiping and more time preparing. The punch came fast, but Kael saw it coming. Years of staying invisible, of reading danger in the shift of shoulders and the tightening of fists, saved him. He ducked left and the boy's knuckles whistled past his ear. The training yard went silent. The boy recovered, face flushed with embarrassment and rage. You little bastard. He came at Kael again, this time serious, and Kael didn't have the training or the strength to stop him. The tackle drove them both into the dirt, air exploding from Kael's lungs as the bigger boy's weight crushed down on top of him. Not so smart now, the boy hissed, drawing back his fist. Enough! Vera's voice cracked across the yard like thunder. The boy froze, fist still cocked, murder in his eyes. Get off him, Vera ordered. Now! The boy climbed off slowly, breathing hard. He started it. He dodged a punch. That's not starting. That's surviving. Vera grabbed the boy by his collar, hauling him to his feet. 50 laps. And if I see you throw another punch outside of sanctioned sparring, you're done here. The boy's face went pale. Commander, Now. He ran. Vara turned to Kael, who was still on his back in the dirt, ribs aching and pride shredded. She didn't offer a hand up, just stood there, looking down at him with those hard eyes. That's what you're walking into every day, she said. That boy's father is Lord Voss, council member, powerful, connected, and he's far from the only noble who wants you gone. I know, do you? Because from down there, you look like prey. And prey doesn't last long in a palace full of wolves. Kael pushed himself upright, spitting blood from a split lip. Then teach me not to be prey. Something shifted in Vera's expression. Not quite respect, not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of both. We'll see, she said. Get up, break's over. By midday, Kael couldn't feel his arms. Vera had run him through drill after drill, correction after correction, until the wooden sword felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and his whole body was one massive bruise. But he didn't quit, didn't complain, didn't give any of them the satisfaction of seeing him break. When Rydian finally came to collect him, Kael could barely walk straight. The captain caught his elbow as he stumbled, steadying him. You did well, Rydian said quietly. Better than expected. Doesn't feel like it. Vera's the hardest instructor in the kingdom. If she didn't break you on day one, you've got potential. Kael glanced back at the training yard where Vara was already drilling the next group. She didn't look his direction, didn't acknowledge him at all, but she hadn't sent him away either. They made it halfway back to Kael's quarters before Rydian spoke again. The king wants to see you, tonight. Private dinner in his chambers. Why? Because despite everything, you're still his son. Rydian's expression was unreadable. And because tomorrow, the council reconvenes. They're going to demand answers about what happens next. What does happen next? That's what the king needs to decide. Rydian stopped outside Kael's door, meeting his eyes. And what you need to prepare for. Because whatever choice he makes, people are going to die. The words settled like lead in Kael's stomach. How many? Enough. Rydian left him there, door closing with a soft click that felt like a cell locking shut. Darius's private chambers were nothing like Kael expected. No throne, no grand furniture, no symbols of power or wealth designed to intimidate. Just a room, books lining the walls, maps spread across a worn table, a fire crackling in the hearth against the evening chill, and standing by the window, silhouetted against the dying light, was the Alpha King. He turned as Kael entered, escorted by guards, who withdrew immediately and closed the door behind them. Sit, Darius said, gesturing to a table set with 2 plates. Real food. Not the prison rations Kael had been expecting. Kael sat slowly, every muscle protesting. Across from him, Darius poured wine into 2 cups, sliding one across the table. You're too young for this, he said. But after the day Vara put you through, you've earned it. Kael took the cup but didn't drink. Why am I here? Because we need to talk, father to son, not king to subject. The words hung between them, strange and awkward, and weighted with 13 years of absence. Darius sat down, studying Kael with eyes that saw too much. You look like her, he said quietly. Your mother. Same stubborn set to your jaw. Same fire in your eyes when someone tells you no. Did you love her? The question came out before Kael could stop it. Harsh, accusing. Darius didn't flinch. No. I wanted her, needed the escape she offered from a life that was eating me alive. But I didn't love her. Then why should I believe you'll protect me? Kael set the cup down, hard enough to slosh wine onto the table. I'm just another mistake you'd rather forget. That's not true, isn't it? Kael leaned forward. You walked away from her without looking back, left her alone and pregnant and terrified. And now you expect me to trust that you've suddenly discovered paternal instincts. I expect you to trust that I keep my promises, Darius said, voice hard. And I promise to keep you alive. Not because you're convenient, not because it serves me politically, but because you're blood. My blood. And I don't abandon family. You did once. The accusation hit its mark. Darius's jaw tightened, pain flashing across his face before he could hide it. You're right, he said quietly. I did. And I can't take that back. Can't undo the years you spent hiding. Can't bring your mother back. All I can do is try to be the father she believed I could become. It's too late for that. Maybe. Darius picked up his wine, took a long drink. But it's not too late to keep you breathing, and right now that's all I'm asking you to let me do. Kael wanted to argue, wanted to throw the words back in his face and storm out, but the exhaustion was too deep, the fear too real. And underneath all the anger and resentment, there was a desperate, terrified part of him that wanted to believe someone gave a damn if he lived or died. Why does Magnus want me gone? He asked instead. What does my existence threaten? Darius set his cup down carefully. Everything he spent 13 years building. Magnus isn't just my Luna's advisor. He's the architect of our entire political structure. He arranged our marriage, orchestrated the alliances that kept us in power, positioned himself as the indispensable voice of reason in a court full of predators. And I ruined that how? Because you're proof I'm not perfect, not infallible, not the unshakable alpha king he's sold to every allied pack from here to the coast. Darius leaned back, frustration evident in every line of his body. Magnus thrives on control, on predictability. And you're chaos. A variable he didn't plan for, can't manipulate, can't contain. So he eliminates me. That's the plan. Kill you, destroy the evidence, let the scandal die with you and chalk it up to a tragic misunderstanding. Kael's throat went tight. And you think you can stop him? I think I have to try. Darius met his eyes. Because if I don't, if I let Magnus win, then everything I've built means nothing. I'm just another tyrant who sacrifices innocence for political convenience. The admission hung in the air, raw and honest. Kael studied his father's face, searching for lies, finding only exhaustion and grim determination. What happens tomorrow? He asked. At the council. Magnus will demand I send you away. For the good of the kingdom. For stability. For every reason that sounds noble but means cowardice. And what will you say? Darius smiled, sharp and cold, that he can take his demands and choke on them. The knock came at midnight. Kael jerked awake, heart hammering, hand reaching for the knife he'd started keeping under his pillow after the first assassination attempt his mother barely survived. The door opened before he could move. Celine stood in the entrance, dressed in dark training leathers, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like violence personified. Get up, she said, quietly. Why? Because someone just tried to poison the wine in Darius's chambers. If you'd drunk more at dinner, you'd be dead right now. The words hit like ice water. Kael scrambled out of bed, still dressed from falling asleep in his clothes. Where are we going? Somewhere Magnus can't reach you. Celine moved into the room, checking the window, the adjoining door, every possible entrance with practiced efficiency. At least not easily. She led him through servant corridors he didn't know existed, moving fast and silent. They passed no guards, encountered no one. Just empty stone passages lit by occasional torches. Finally, they emerged into what looked like an old armory, long abandoned and filled with dust-covered weapons. Celine locked the door behind them, dragging a heavy chest in front of it, for good measure. No one knows about this place, she said. Not even Darius. It's been my bolt hole since I was 15 and realized trust is a luxury royals can't afford. Kael looked around, taking in the forgotten blades and moth-eaten banners. How long do I stay here? Until dawn. Until we figure out how Magnus got to the wine. Until we decide whether you're safer inside the palace or running for the border. You want me to run? I want you alive. Celine crossed to a table, lighting a lantern that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Whether that means running or fighting is still up for debate. I won't run, even if it's the smart choice, especially then. Kael met her eyes. My mother spent 13 years running, hiding me, making me invisible, and she still died. So no, I'm done running. Celine studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her expression. You sound like him, she said finally. Too stubborn to know when you're beaten. Is that a compliment? It's a warning. Celine pulled out a whetstone and one of the old blades, testing its edge. Stubborn gets you killed if you're not smart enough to back it up. Then I'll get smart. You'll try. Celine started sharpening the blade with smooth, practiced strokes. But intelligence takes time. And time is something you don't have. Because of Magnus. Because of politics. Power. Fear. Celine didn't look up from her work. That council meeting tomorrow isn't just about you. It's about whether this kingdom can survive having its dirty secrets dragged into the light. Whether our allies will stand with us or smell blood and attack. And if they attack, then we fight. Celine's voice hardened. And you become exactly what Magnus feared. Not a mistake, not a scandal, but a symbol of everything this kingdom stands for. Strength, survival, the refusal to be broken. I'm not a symbol. I'm just a kid who wants to know who killed his mother. Then use that. Celine finally looked up, eyes blazing in the lantern light. Use the anger. Use the grief. Use every ounce of fire burning in your chest and turn it into something Magnus can't extinguish. How? By surviving. By standing in front of that council tomorrow and proving you're more than just the king's mistake. She set down the blade and whetstone, leaning forward. You want justice for your mother. You want to matter. You want to prove you deserve to exist. Then stop waiting for permission and take it. The words hit something deep in Kael's chest, something that had been buried under fear and shame for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. Pride. What do I do? He asked. Tomorrow, when Magnus demands you be sent away, you stand up. Celine's smile was sharp as broken glass. And you tell the entire council exactly why you're staying. Bam Maushan. Dawn broke over Silver Fang territory in shades of blood and gold. Kael stood in front of a mirror in the guest chambers, wearing formal court attire that felt like armor. Dark fabrics, silver accents, the thorn crest embroidered over his heart like a brand. He looked like royalty, felt like an imposter. Darius appeared in the doorway, dressed in full alpha regalia, furs across his shoulders, crown of twisted thorns and silver, the kind of outfit designed to remind everyone exactly who held the power. Ready? He asked. No. Good. Darius crossed the room, adjusting the crest on Kael's chest with careful hands. If you weren't terrified, I'd be worried. What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing? Then you recover. Darius gripped his shoulders, forcing Kael to meet his eyes. Listen to me. That council is full of wolves who've spent their entire lives learning to smell fear and exploit weakness. They're going to come at you with everything they have. Questions, accusations, demands. How do I fight that? By telling the truth. Darius's grip tightened. No embellishments, no apologies, just the facts. You exist. Your mother is dead. Someone wants you gone, and you're not leaving until you know why. Simple as that. Simple as that. It didn't feel simple. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and being asked to jump with no guarantee anything would catch him. But Kael nodded anyway because the alternative was worse. They walked to the council chamber together, Celine joining them at the final corridor. She wore her full lunar regalia, crown gleaming in the torchlight, expression carved from ice. She didn't speak to Kael, didn't acknowledge him at all. But as they reached the doors, she caught his arm for just a moment, squeezed once, hard, then released him and walked through like she owned the world. The council chamber was packed, not just the 12 nobles who normally attended. Every major house, every allied pack leader, every person with enough power to matter and enough curiosity to demand answers. They fell silent as Darius entered, Celine at his right hand and Kael 3 steps behind. The stairs felt like physical weight. Kael forced himself to keep his head up, his shoulders back, his expression neutral. Prey didn't last long in a palace full of wolves, and he was done being prey. Darius took his seat at the head of the table. Selena settled beside him like a blade in its sheath. Kael remained standing. Lord Magnus rose from his position at the far end, dressed in formal robes that screamed old money and older power. His smile was warm, paternal, absolutely venomous. My king, my Luna. Thank you for honoring us with this audience. Magnus inclined his head respectfully. And young Kael, welcome. I trust your stay in the palace has been comfortable. Kael bit back the first three responses that came to mind. Comfortable wasn't the word he'd use for attempted poisoning and combat training that left him covered in bruises. It's been educational, he said instead. Excellent. Magnus clasped his hands behind his back, addressing the room. Then perhaps you've learned enough to understand what we discussed today. The future of this kingdom, the strength of our alliances, and the difficult choices required to maintain both. Here it comes, Celine murmured. Magnus turned his attention to Darius. My king, this council has served you faithfully for 7 years. We've supported your reign, defended your borders, stood beside you through war and peace alike. Get to the point, Darius said flatly. The point, Magnus's voice hardened, is that loyalty requires honesty. And we need to be honest about what this boy's presence means for our kingdom. He's my son. He's a vulnerability. Magnus gestured around the table. The Ironwood Pack is mobilizing. The Eastern Territories are questioning our strength. Our enemies see weakness, and they're preparing to exploit it. So we give them what they want, Darius said. We prove we're weak by abandoning royal blood because it's inconvenient. We prove we're smart by prioritizing the kingdom over personal mistakes. Magnus's eyes glittered. Send the boy away. Quietly. Give him gold. Give him land in a distant territory. Let him live in peace far from the politics that threaten him. You mean far from the truth that threatens you. The accusation dropped into the council chamber like a stone into still water. Magnus went very still. I'm afraid I don't understand, my king. Don't you? Darius rose from his throne, power flooding the room. You suggested the boy is a vulnerability, but he's only vulnerable because someone wants him dead. Someone who knew about him within months of his birth. Someone who's had 13 years to plan, to position, to wait for exactly the right moment to use him as a weapon. You're suggesting Magnus started. I'm suggesting someone in this room has been playing a very long game. Darius's voice dropped to something deadly. And I'm tired of pretending I don't see it. The council exploded, nobles shouting, accusations flying, lines being drawn so fast the room fractured into factions before Kael could track them all. And through it all, Magnus stood perfectly calm, perfectly composed, waiting. Kael felt the trap closing like a fist around his throat. This was exactly what Magnus wanted. Chaos, division. The council tearing itself apart while the kingdom's enemies watched and sharpened their teeth. He had to do something, had to stop this before it spiraled beyond recovery. So Kael did the only thing he could think of. He stepped forward and told the truth. I know who killed my mother. The words cut through the chaos like a blade. Every head turned toward him. Kael's heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. But he kept talking because stopping now meant dying later. 2 weeks before she died, my mother told me someone was watching us. A man from the capital. Tall, silver hair, expensive clothes. He came to our settlement asking about herbs, but he wasn't looking at plants. He was looking at me. And you believe this was Lord Magnus? One of the nobles demanded. I believe my mother didn't trust him. I believe she hid me whenever he visited. And I believe 3 days after his last visit, assassins came to our home and killed her. That's not proof, Magnus said calmly. That's grief and suspicion. Then explain the fire. Kael turned to face him directly. Explain why the healer's quarters burned to ash the same night I arrived at the palace. Explain why every piece of evidence about my mother's death conveniently disappeared before anyone could investigate. Coincidence. Kael's laugh was sharp. My mother spent 13 years teaching me to spot danger, to read people, to know when someone wanted me dead before they could act on it. And I'm telling this council that you wanted her silent and me erased. Prove it, Magnus challenged. I don't have to prove it. Kael looked around the table, meeting every noble's eyes. I just have to survive long enough for the truth to come out. And I will, because I'm not running, I'm not hiding, I'm staying right here where you can't bury me quietly. The council chamber went silent. Magnus smiled. Then perhaps you should tell this council the real reason you're here. Not justice, not truth, but a bastard son hoping to claim a throne he has no right to. I don't want the throne. Then what do you want? Kael straightened, pulling every ounce of strength from places he didn't know existed. I want to know who I am. I want my mother's death to mean something, and I want to look the man who killed her in the eyes and watch him answer for it." The words echoed through the chamber. Darius was staring at him with something that might have been pride. Celine's expression was unreadable. And Magnus. Magnus looked like a man whose perfect plan had just developed a crack. Small, barely visible. But there. "This council is adjourned," Darius announced. "We reconvene tomorrow. And in the meantime, Kael Arden remains under royal protection. Anyone who touches him answers to me personally." The nobles filed out slowly, whispers spreading like wildfire. Kael stood in the center of the chamber, legs shaking, lungs burning, absolutely terrified. But alive. Still alive. Magnus was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at Kael with those cold eyes. "Brave speech," he said softly. "Let's see how long bravery keeps you breathing." Then he was gone. Leaving Kael alone with the Alpha King and Luna and the crushing weight of a war he'd just declared without knowing if he could survive it. Celine crossed to him first, studying his face. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Probably both. Definitely both." But Celine's lips quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You just backed Magnus into a corner in front of the entire council. Now he has to prove you're lying or admit you're right, which means he'll come for me harder." "Absolutely." Celine turned to Darius. "We need to move him. Tonight. Somewhere Magnus can't reach." Darius nodded slowly. "Agreed. But first." He crossed to Kael, gripping his shoulder. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than I expected. Better than most grown men would have managed. I'm terrified." "Good." Darius's grip tightened. "Means you're smart. But you're also still breathing, and as long as you keep breathing, we keep fighting. For how long? As long as it takes." The conviction in those words should have been comforting, but all Kael felt was the crushing certainty that he'd just stepped past the point of no return. There was no going back now, no safe retreat, no way out except through. And on the other side of that door, Magnus was already planning his next move. Midnight found Kael in yet another hidden room, this one deep in the palace catacombs where the old kings were buried. Not exactly comforting, but defensible. One entrance, stone walls 3 feet thick, and far enough from the main palace that Magnus would have to bring an army to reach him. Celine had posted her personal guards outside. Not just any soldiers. Her wolves. The ones who'd die before they let anyone through that door. Kael sat on a stone bench carved from the catacomb wall, trying not to think about the fact that he was sleeping in a tomb. Failing spectacularly. The door opened and Darius entered, carrying a leather satchel. "Couldn't sleep either," he said. "Can you blame me?" "No." Darius sat down beside him, setting the satchel between them. "Which is why I brought you something." He pulled out a blade. Not wooden like the training swords. Real steel, short enough to conceal, sharp enough to kill. "Your mother gave this to me," Darius said quietly. "Before I left. Before I walked away and never looked back. She said it was for protection. I thought she meant from enemies outside our packs. Didn't realize she meant enemies I'd create by being careless." He held it out, hilt first. Kyle took it slowly, feeling the weight, the balance, the cold reality of holding something designed to end lives. "I don't know how to use this," he admitted. "Vara will teach you." Darius leaned back against the stone wall. "But until then, keep it close. And if someone comes for you, don't hesitate. Don't think, just survive. Even if it means killing, especially then." Darius met his eyes. "This isn't a story, Kael. This is survival. And survival doesn't give you the luxury of clean hands. Is that what it cost you? Clean hands. That and more." Darius's voice went distant. "I've done things I can't take back, made choices that haunt me. But I'm still here. Still breathing, still fighting, because the alternative is letting the monsters win. And if I become one of the monsters, then you'll be in good company." Darius smiled, sharp and bitter. "Welcome to royalty." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. "What you did today. Standing up to Magnus. Refusing to run. She always said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. She told you that. In her journal. Every page, every entry. Darius's voice cracked just slightly. She believed in you right up until the end. Don't make her wrong. Then he was gone, leaving Kyle alone in the tomb with a blade and the crushing weight of expectations he didn't know how to carry. He lay down on the stone bench, knife gripped in one hand, and tried to sleep. Failed. Because somewhere above him, in the palace proper, Magnus was awake too. Planning, scheming, preparing his next move in a game Kale didn't know the rules to. And tomorrow, when the sun rose and the council reconvened, one of them would make a mistake. Kyle just prayed it wasn't him. Because if Magnus won, if the man who'd killed his mother walked free, then everything she'd sacrificed meant nothing, and Kyle would rather die than let that happen. The blade felt cold and certain in his grip, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, Kyle understood what Celine had meant. Stop being prey. Start being the wolf. The attack came 3 hours before dawn, not with soldiers or assassins creeping through the catacombs. That would have been too obvious, too traceable back to whoever ordered it. No, this attack was engineered with the kind of precision that came from someone who understood exactly how power worked in a palace built on secrets and blood. Kale woke to the sound of screaming, not close. Somewhere above in the main palace. Distant but getting louder. The kind of screaming that meant people were dying and no one was coming to save them. He rolled off the stone bench, knife already in his hand, heart slamming against his ribs hard enough to crack bone. The door to the catacombs burst open. Not Magnus, not assassins, Celine, and she was covered in blood. "Get up," she snarled, grabbing Kale by the arm and hauling him toward the exit. "Now! We're out of time!" "What happened?" Magnus made his move. Celine's grip was iron, her voice barely controlled fury wrapped around terror. "He's claiming Darius poisoned the Ironwood ambassador during last night's feast, that the king is trying to start a war to distract from the scandal of your existence. That's insane. That's politics." Celine shoved him through the doorway into the corridor where bodies of her personal guards lay sprawled in pools of blood. Half the council believes him. The other half is too scared to speak up. And the Ironwood Pact just declared the peace treaty void. Kale felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. Where's Darius? Fighting for his life in the throne room. Celine pulled him past the bodies, moving fast. Magnus brought soldiers, claimed it was for the king's protection, but it's a coup, clean, surgical, and perfectly timed. We have to help him. We have to survive. Celine rounded on him, eyes blazing gold. Darius can handle himself, but if you die, if Magnus gets his hands on you, then everything we fought for is finished. You're the proof. The living evidence that Magnus orchestrated this entire crisis. I don't understand. You will. Celine grabbed his face, forcing him to focus. Your mother didn't just stumble into an affair with the Alpha King. She was positioned, placed in Darius's path at exactly the right moment by someone who understood how lonely he was, how desperate for something real in a life built on duty and expectation. Magnus. Celine released him, moving again. He created you. Not physically, but strategically. He knew about you from the beginning because he orchestrated the beginning. And when the time was right, when tensions with Ironwood were high and the kingdom needed stability, he used your existence as the match to light the fire. But my mother loved him, loved Darius. Maybe, Celine's voice cracked, or maybe she was just another piece on a board she didn't know she was playing on. Either way, she's dead, and we're running out of time to keep you from joining her. They emerged into a servant corridor that should have been empty. Wasn't. 6 soldiers in Ironwood colors blocked the passage. Not palace guards, enemy combatants who'd somehow infiltrated past every defense. The lead soldier smiled when he saw Kyle. "There's the bastard," he said, drawing his blade. "Lord Magnus sends his regards." Celine didn't hesitate. She moved like violence made flesh, power exploding through the narrow corridor in a wave that sent 3 soldiers slamming into the walls hard enough to crack stone. Her claws extended, eyes blazing full wolf, and she tore into the remaining 3 with the kind of brutality that made Kyle understand exactly why enemies feared the Silver Fang Luna. It was over in seconds. 6 bodies, 6 pools of spreading blood, and Celine standing in the center of it, breathing hard, covered in gore. "Can you fight?" she asked without looking at him. "I've had 4 days of training, then you better learn fast." She grabbed a fallen soldier's blade, tossing it to Kyle. Because we're going through the eastern wing and it's not going to be empty. She was right. They fought their way through 2 more ambushes. Kale mostly stayed behind Celine, trying not to die, clutching the blade with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold it. Once, a soldier got past Celine's guard and came at Kyle with murder in his eyes. Kale didn't think, just moved. Drove the blade up under the man's ribs the way Vera had shown him during training. Felt the resistance of muscle and bone. Felt the hot rush of blood over his hands. Felt the man die. He stumbled back, gasping, and Celine caught him before he could fall. "Breathe," she ordered. "You did what you had to. Now keep moving." They made it to the eastern courtyard as the sky started to lighten. Dawn coming whether they were ready or not. A horse waited there. Saddled, provisioned. Celine had planned for this. "Get on," she said. "What about you?" "I'm going back for Darius." Celine grabbed the reins, forcing the horse closer. "You're going to ride for the northern border. There's a safe house 3 days hard riding from here. Old contacts of mine who owe me favors Magnus doesn't know about." "I'm not leaving him. You don't have a choice." Celine's voice turned to steel. This was always the endgame, Kyle. Magnus wins if you die. He loses if you survive. So you survive. You get to safety. You let Darius and I handle the war. Kale stared at her, this woman who'd hated him 5 days ago and was now covered in blood trying to save his life. "Why?" he asked. "Why does it matter if I live?" "Because you're the truth." Celine's expression cracked, pain and fury and something that might have been hope bleeding through. "And truth is the only weapon we have left." She shoved him toward the horse. Kale was reaching for the saddle when the arrow took Celine through the shoulder. She went down hard, gasping, blood blooming across her leathers. Kale spun. Magnus stood at the courtyard entrance with a dozen soldiers, a crossbow in his hands, and that same cold smile on his face. "Going somewhere?" he asked pleasantly. Celine tried to rise, claws extended, power crackling. Magnus shot her again, this time through the leg. She collapsed with a scream that tore through Kyle's chest like a physical wound. "Stop!" Kyle shouted. "Please, she's done. You won." "Did I?" Magnus lowered the crossbow, studying Kyle like a specimen. "Because from where I'm standing, you're still breathing, still threatening everything I've built, still existing when you should have been erased 13 years ago." He walked closer, soldiers flanking him, boots crunching on gravel. "Your mother was supposed to disappear after the affair ended. Take the gold I offered, vanish into some distant territory and raise you quietly where you'd never threaten my carefully constructed alliance. You paid her. Handsomely." Magnus stopped 10 feet away. But she got sentimental. Started believing the child of an alpha king deserved more than exile. Started making plans to reveal your existence when you were old enough to defend yourself. So you killed her. I eliminated a problem. Magnus's voice remained perfectly calm. "Just like I'm about to eliminate you. The only difference is this time there won't be any mysteries. No hidden journals, no vengeful sons showing up years later demanding justice." He raised the crossbow, aimed at Kyle's heart, and Darius came through the courtyard wall like a battering ram made of fury and fangs. Full wolf form, massive, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still moving, still fighting. He hit Magnus before the man could turn, jaws closing around the crossbow and ripping it from his hands. The soldiers scattered, trying to get clear, but Darius was already moving again, not toward Magnus, toward Kyle. He shifted mid-leap, landing human beside his son, grabbing him with bloody hands. "Run," he gasped. "Now! I won't leave you." "You don't have a choice." Darius shoved him toward the horse. This was always going to end bloody, always going to cost everything. But you survive. You live. You make sure Magnus answers for what he's done. The soldiers were regrouping, closing in. Darius turned to face them, power flooding back through his battered body. "Go!" he roared. And Kyle ran, grabbed the saddle, pulled himself up, kicked the horse into a gallop that sent them crashing through the courtyard gate and into the pre-dawn darkness beyond the palace walls. Behind him, he heard fighting, screaming, the sounds of a kingdom tearing itself apart. He didn't look back, couldn't. Because looking back meant seeing Darius fall, meant watching Celine bleed out in the courtyard, meant accepting that everyone who'd tried to protect him was dying while he ran like a coward. The horse carried him through the outer city, past buildings just starting to wake, past people who had no idea their kingdom was burning from the inside out. He made it 3 miles before the grief hit him like a physical blow. Made it to the edge of the forest before he had to stop, sliding off the horse and retching into the bushes while his entire body shook with sobs he couldn't control. They were dead. Had to be dead. No one survived what he'd left behind. Cale knelt in the dirt, knife still clutched in one bloody hand, and felt something inside him break that he didn't know how to fix. That's when he heard the voice. "Going somewhere, boy." Kyle spun, blade up, ready to fight or die or both. A man stepped from the shadows between the trees, not young, not old, scarred and weathered and carrying himself with the kind of easy confidence that meant he'd seen violence and learned to live with it. Silas, the tracker who'd helped Kyle reach the palace, the man his mother had trusted. "What are you doing here?" Kyle gasped. "Following you." Silas moved closer, hands visible and empty. "Your mother asked me to watch over you if things went bad. Guess they went bad. They killed her." Cale's voice cracked. "Magnus killed her, and now he's killing everyone else, and I just left them. You survived." Silas crouched down, meeting Kale's eyes. "That's what they wanted, what they fought for. So honor it." "How? How do I honor this?" "By finishing what they started." Silas stood, offering his hand. "Come on. We need to move before Magnus sends trackers." Cale took the hand, letting Silas pull him upright. "Where are we going? Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can heal. And then?" Silas's expression hardened. "Then we figure out how to take everything Magnus built and burn it to ash." Yeah. The safe house was less a house and more a fortified bunker carved into the side of a mountain 3 days' hard ride north of Silver Fang territory. Cale barely remembered the journey. Just scattered images of endless forest, sleeping in caves, Silas keeping watch while Cale tried not to drown in guilt and grief. They arrived at sunset on the 3rd day. An old woman answered the door. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that had seen empires rise and fall and learned not to be impressed by either. "Silas," she said. "It's been years." "Mara." Silas inclined his head. "I need sanctuary. For him." Mara studied Kyle with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "The bastard prince," she said. "The one who burned a kingdom." "I didn't burn anything." "Not yet." Mara stepped aside, gesturing them in. "But you will? That's what bastard princes do. They burn or they die. Sometimes both." The bunker was larger than it looked from outside. Multiple rooms carved into the mountain, supplies for months, weapons on every wall. Mara was a warrior, had been for decades by the look of her scars. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a chair. "Eat. Then tell me why half the kingdom is searching for your corpse." Kyle sat, ate, and told her everything. When he finished, Mara was quiet for a long time. "Magnus played this perfectly," she said finally. "Used your existence to destabilize the throne. Used the destabilization to justify intervention. Used the intervention to seize power. Clean, surgical, exactly what I'd have done in his position. That's not helping. I'm not here to make you feel better." Mara leaned forward. "I'm here to tell you the truth. And the truth is Magnus won. He has the throne. He has the council. And he has the Ironwood Pack backing his claim that Darius tried to start a war. Then it's over. Maybe." Mara's eyes glittered. "Or maybe it's just beginning. I don't understand. You're alive. That's all that matters. As long as you breathe, Magnus's victory isn't complete. He has to hunt you. Has to prove you died or risk you showing up years from now to challenge his rule. I can't challenge anything. I'm 13, untrained, alone. You're royal blood, and you're angry." Mara smiled sharp as broken glass. "Anger is a weapon if you know how to wield it." "How?" "By becoming exactly what Magnus fears most." Mara stood, crossing to a locked chest in the corner. "You want justice for your mother. You want revenge for what Magnus took from you. Then stop being the scared kid running from shadows." "What do I become?" "The shadow." Mara opened the chest, pulling out documents, letters, records, maps. "I've been watching Magnus for years, tracking his movements, his contacts, his dirty secrets, and I think I know where he's vulnerable." She spread the papers across the table. Magnus didn't just orchestrate your mother's affair, she said. He's been placing people, manipulating bloodlines, creating crises he could solve for 13 years, maybe longer. Why? Power. Mara tapped one of the documents. Pure, calculated power. He's not satisfied being an advisor. He wants the throne, wants to reshape the kingdom in his image, and he's been moving pieces into position for years. Then how do we stop him? We don't. Mara met Kael's eyes. You do. By finding the one person Magnus can't control, can't manipulate, can't eliminate. Who? His daughter. The words hit like ice water. Magnus has a daughter. Had. Mara pulled out a faded portrait. She disappeared 15 years ago, ran away from court after Magnus tried to force a political marriage. No one's seen her since. But if she's alive, if she knows what her father's become, she might be willing to help us destroy him. Or she might turn me over to him. Possible. Mara tucked the portrait back into the chest. But right now, she's the only card we have to play. So you decide. Hide here for the rest of your life, or go hunting for a ghost who might help you take back everything Magnus stole. Kael looked at the papers spread across the table, at the evidence of 13 years of manipulation and murder and carefully orchestrated chaos. He thought about his mother dying alone, about Darius and Selene bleeding out while he ran, about spending the rest of his life as the bastard prince who survived while everyone who mattered died, and made the only choice he could live with. Where do I start? He asked. Mara smiled. Now you're thinking like a wolf. Mom. Training began the next morning and made Vera's drills look like a pleasant walk. Mara didn't believe in gentle instruction. She believed in survival. Kael spent 18 hours a day learning to fight, to track, to read terrain and anticipate ambush, to survive on nothing, to move through hostile territory without leaving a trace. And at night, when his body was too exhausted to move, Mara made him study politics, strategy, the history of coups and counter-coups stretching back centuries. This isn't about revenge, she told him one night while they reviewed maps of the kingdom. Revenge is personal, weak. What you need is revolution. What's the difference? Revenge dies with the target. Revolution reshapes the world. She traced lines across the map, showing him supply routes and weak points in territories where Magnus's control was more illusion than reality. You're not going to walk into the throne room and challenge him, she said. You're going to turn his own strategies against him. Find the people he's manipulated, the alliances he's forced, the secrets he's buried. And you're going to give them all a reason to turn on him at once. How long will that take? Years. Mara met his eyes. You're 13. Alone. Untrained. You're not ready for this fight. Not even close. So we prepare. We plan. We wait for exactly the right moment. And if that moment never comes, then we make it. Weeks turned into months. Kael learned to fight with blades and claws, and the kind of vicious pragmatism that came from understanding he'd only get one chance and couldn't afford to waste it. He learned to track rumors and follow leads, and piece together the puzzle of Magnus's network from fragments scattered across a dozen territories. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture emerged. Magnus hadn't just manipulated one affair. He'd orchestrated dozens, placed people in positions of power across every major pack, created dependencies and debts and blackmail material that tied half the kingdom to him. Darius and Selene weren't his first targets, just his most ambitious. This is bigger than I thought, Kael said one night, staring at the web of connections they'd mapped. It always is. Mara added another line to the web. Power this deep doesn't happen overnight. Magnus has been building this for decades, maybe his entire life. Then how do we fight it? We find the cracks, the people he's pushed too far, the alliances held together by fear instead of loyalty, and we exploit them. That could take years. Yes. Mara looked at him. Are you willing to wait? Kael thought about his mother, about Darius, about Selena bleeding out in a courtyard while he ran. I'll wait as long as it takes, he said, but I'm not stopping until Magnus answers for what he's done. Good. Mara smiled. Then let's get back to work. 6 months after fleeing the palace, word reached the bunker that changed everything. Darius was alive, imprisoned, stripped of his throne and his crown, but alive. Kale nearly broke down when he heard. "Where is he?" he demanded. "Magnus has him in the old fortress on the southern border," Silas said, "under heavy guard. They're calling it protective custody, but it's a cage. And Celine. What about Celine? She's alive too. Barely. Magnus is keeping her as insurance. As long as Darius has something to lose, he won't try anything stupid." Kale felt hope and rage war in his chest. "We have to get them out." "With what army?" Mara challenged. "You, me, Silas, against a fortress full of soldiers loyal to Magnus. Then we find an army." "From where?" Mara gestured to the maps. "Every pack that might have helped is either under Magnus's control or too scared to move against him." "Not every pack." Kyle pulled out one of the older documents, a treaty signed 20 years ago between Silver Fang and a northern pack called Frostborn, dissolved after a territorial dispute but never formally declared void. "The Frostborn hate Magnus," Kyle said. "He forced their alpha's daughter into a marriage alliance that ended in suicide. They've been looking for an excuse to move against him for years. And you think they'll help a 13-year-old bastard prince? I think they'll help the legitimate heir to the Silver Fang throne remove the man who murdered their princess." Kale met Mara's eyes. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering alliance. Help me free Darius. Help me expose Magnus. And when the dust settles, I'll make sure Frostborn gets everything they lost in that territorial dispute. That's a dangerous promise. It's the only one I have." Mara studied him for a long moment. "You've grown up fast," she said finally. "I didn't have a choice." "No. You didn't." Mara stood, moving to the weapons wall. "All right, we do this. But we do it my way. Slow, careful. One mistake and we're all dead." "I understand." "I hope so. Because what you're proposing isn't a rescue mission. It's the opening move in a war, and wars don't end until someone burns." It took 3 more months to make contact with Frostborn, another 2 to negotiate terms. But finally, on a frozen morning in the dead of winter, Kyle stood before the Frostborn Alpha in a fortress built of ice and stone and old grudges. Alpha Fenris was everything Kale expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Massive, scarred, gray-haired and gray-eyed with the kind of presence that made strong men nervous. He studied Kyle with those cold eyes for what felt like an eternity. "You look like your father," he said finally. "Same stubborn set to your jaw. Same fire in your eyes when someone tells you no. Did you know him?" "I fought beside him. Years ago, before Magnus twisted everything good in that kingdom into something rotten." Fenris leaned back in his throne. "I liked Darius, respected him. Which is why I'm going to help you. What do you want in return? What you already offered. Territory, reparations for my daughter. And Magnus's head on a pike. I can't promise the last one. Then promise me you'll try." Fenris's smile was sharp as winter wind. "That's all I ask." They sealed the alliance with blood and iron. And 2 weeks later, Kyle led a force of 50 Frostborn warriors toward the southern fortress where Darius was being held. Not as a scared kid running from shadows, as a commander with an army at his back and vengeance in his heart. The attack came at midnight. They hit fast and brutal, overwhelming the outer guards before they could raise an alarm. Mara led the assault on the main gate while Kyle and Silas took a small team through the water tunnels that fed the fortress. It was messy, violent, exactly what Kyle had trained for. They fought their way through 3 levels of defenders, leaving bodies in their wake. Kyle didn't hesitate anymore. Didn't freeze when blood sprayed or men screamed. He'd learned to be the wolf, and wolves didn't apologize for surviving. They found Darius in the deepest cell, chained to a wall, beaten but unbroken. He looked up as Kyle entered, disbelief flashing across his battered face. "Kyle, we're getting you out." Kyle moved to the chains, breaking them with a strength he didn't know he had. "Where's Celine?" "Different wing." Darius staggered upright, gripping Kyle's shoulder. "Eastern Tower." "But it's a trap. Magnus knew you'd come." The words were still leaving his mouth when the explosion tore through the fortress. Not one explosion, 3, positioned perfectly to collapse the escape routes and trap them inside. Kale felt the stone shake beneath his feet, heard the screaming start, and understood with terrible clarity that Mara had been right. Wars didn't end until someone burned, and Magnus had just lit the match. "Get to Selene," Darius ordered, already moving. "I'll hold them off. You'll die." "Probably." Darius smiled, sharp and bitter. "But that's what fathers do. They buy their sons time to survive." He shoved Kael toward the corridor. "Go, now! And don't you dare waste this!" Kael ran, through smoke and fire and collapsing stone, Silas at his side. Frostborn warriors covering their retreat. They found Selene in the eastern tower just as Magnus had planned. She was alive. But she wasn't alone. Magnus stood behind her, blade pressed to her throat. That same cold smile on his face. "Hello, Kael," he said pleasantly. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Let her go." "Why would I do that?" Magnus pressed the blade tighter, drawing blood. "She's the only thing keeping your father from tearing this fortress apart. And she's the only reason you're not ordering your little army to storm this tower." Kael felt Silas tense beside him, ready to move. "Don't," he said quietly. "Smart boy." Magnus's eyes glittered. "You've grown up fast. Learned to think strategically. Almost makes me regret having to kill you. You won't. Won't I?" Magnus tilted his head. "You're trapped. Your escape routes are collapsed. Your army is dying in the floors below. And in about 3 minutes, this entire fortress is going to be rubble. Then you die with us. A sacrifice I'm willing to make." Magnus's voice remained perfectly calm. "Because as long as you're alive, my claim to the throne is incomplete. Better we all burn than risk you surviving to tell your truth." Kael's mind raced, looking for the play. The angle. The way out that didn't end with everyone dead. And that's when Selene moved. Not away from the blade, into it. She drove her throat forward onto the steel, blood spraying, and in Magnus's moment of shock, she grabbed his wrist and twisted hard enough to break bone. The blade clattered to the stone. Selene collapsed, and Kael moved. He hit Magnus like a storm. Every ounce of rage and grief and training Mara had beaten into him, channeled into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Just pure violence. They crashed through the tower window in a tangle of limbs and snarls, falling 2 stories into the courtyard below. Kael landed on top, blade somehow still in his hand, driving down toward Magnus's heart. Magnus caught his wrist, eyes blazing. "You can't kill me," he hissed. "I made you, created the circumstances that brought you into existence. Without me, you're nothing." Kael looked into those cold eyes and saw 13 years of manipulation, of death, of a kingdom twisted into something Magnus could control. "You're right," he said, and drove the blade through Magnus's throat. Blood sprayed hot and red. Magnus's eyes went wide with shock and pain and something that might have been respect, then empty. Kael rolled off the corpse, gasping, covered in blood. Silas appeared beside him, pulling him upright. "We have to go," he said. "Now. The fortress is coming down." "Selene." Kael looked up at the tower where she'd fallen. Saw Darius carrying her limp form down the stairs, running like death itself was on his heels. They made it out of the fortress 30 seconds before the final explosion brought the whole structure down in a cloud of dust and screaming stone. Kael knelt in the snow, watching it burn, and felt something inside him finally break free. It was over. Magnus was dead. But the kingdom was still fractured, still broken, still bleeding from 13 years of manipulation, and Kael was the only one left standing who knew the truth. Darius limped over, still carrying Selene. Her eyes were open but distant. Blood soaked through the bandages Darius had wrapped around her throat. "Is she alive?" "Barely." Darius set her down gently. "We need a healer, now." Fenris appeared with his warriors, surveying the burning fortress. "Your war is won," he said to Kael. "Magnus is dead." "What now?" Kael looked at Darius, at Selene, at the Frostborn warriors who'd bled for someone else's kingdom. "Now we rebuild," he said. "We expose everything Magnus did, every manipulation, every death, every lie, and we make sure it never happens again. That's going to take years." "I know." Kael met Fenris's eyes. "But I'm not running anymore, not from this, not from anything." Fenris smiled. "Good. Then let's get started." Gita. 3 months later, Kael stood in the throne room where this all began. The council had been purged, Magnus's allies exposed and exiled, the truth dragged into the light whether the kingdom wanted to see it or not. Darius sat on his throne, crown restored, Selene beside him with a scar across her throat that would never fully heal. And standing before them, surrounded by nobles who'd spent 13 years pretending not to see the rot eating their kingdom from inside, was Kael. "The council has reviewed the evidence," Darius said formally, "and we've reached a decision." He rose, descending the dais. "Kael Arden, you came to this palace as a secret, a scandal, a threat to everything we'd built." He stopped in front of Kael, meeting his eyes. "But you leave it as something else entirely. A warrior, a leader, and my son." He drew a blade from his belt, the same blade Mira had given him years ago. "Kneel." Kael knelt. "By the authority of the Silver Fang throne and the witness testimony of this council," Darius said, laying the blade on Kael's shoulder, "I name you legitimate heir to this kingdom, royal blood, protected by law, bound by duty." He moved the blade to the other shoulder, and accountable to the truth you fought so hard to protect. He sheathed the blade, offering his hand. "Rise, Prince Kael of Silver Fang." Kael took the hand, rose, and faced a council that had no choice but to accept what he'd become. Not because they wanted to, but because he'd survived everything they'd thrown at him and come back stronger. The meeting adjourned. Nobles filed out, some respectful, others resentful, all of them recognizing that the boy who'd arrived in a storm had irrevocably changed their kingdom. Kael stayed behind as the room emptied, standing in the silence. Selene approached, her movements still careful around the healing wound. "You did well," she said quietly. "Better than I expected. I had good teachers. You had the will to survive." She studied him with those sharp eyes. "The rest we just refined. What happens now? Now you learn to rule, to lead, to carry the weight of a crown whether you wear it or not." Selene's expression softened slightly. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so. She would be." Selene touched his shoulder briefly. "You became exactly what she believed you could be. Something stronger than secrets, stronger than shame." She walked away, leaving Kael alone with Darius. Father and son stood in the throne room, years of absence and pain and blood between them. "I'm sorry," Darius said finally, "for all of it. For not knowing, for not protecting her, for letting you grow up thinking you were a mistake. I'm not sorry anymore." Kael met his eyes. "If I hadn't been hidden, Magnus would have killed me years ago. If my mother hadn't sacrificed, I wouldn't have survived to fight back. If you hadn't given me the chance, I'd have died before I understood what truth meant." He took a breath. "I'm not a mistake. I'm a consequence of choices and circumstances and a kingdom that needed someone willing to burn it all down to expose the rot. And now I make sure it was worth it." Kael looked around the throne room, at the empty council seats and the bloodstains that would never fully wash away. "I make sure no one else has to hide who they are, or die for telling the truth." Darius gripped his shoulder, pride and pain warring in his expression. "Then let's get started," he said. And together they walked out of the throne room into a kingdom reborn in fire and blood, and the stubborn refusal of one bastard prince to let lies win. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. The kingdom didn't heal overnight. 3 months after Magnus's death, the scars still ran deep. Nobles who'd built careers on his manipulation scrambled to distance themselves from the wreckage. Allied pacts demanded explanations for policies they'd been strong-armed into accepting. And somewhere in the Eastern Territories, whispers started spreading that maybe the cure had been worse than the disease. That maybe burning down 13 years of careful diplomacy to expose one man's crimes had left them vulnerable, weak, ripe for conquest. Kael felt the shift before anyone else acknowledged it. The way conversation stopped when he entered rooms, the sidelong glances from guards who'd fought beside him at the fortress. The careful distance nobles maintained like they were afraid getting too close might burn them too. He'd become exactly what he'd set out to be. The truth. And truth, as it turned out, made people deeply uncomfortable. He stood in the war room at midnight, studying maps by candlelight when Darius found him. "Can't sleep?" his father asked. "Can you?" Darius crossed to the table, picking up one of the tactical reports. "No. Not when the Ironwood Pack is moving troops to our border and half the council is demanding we negotiate instead of defend. They want to avoid war. They want to avoid responsibility. Darius set the report down hard enough to rattle the ink bottles. Magnus spent years positioning Ironwood as our greatest threat, built the entire alliance structure around keeping them contained. And now that he's gone, now that we've exposed how he manipulated both sides, Ironwood sees an opportunity. To invade. To reclaim territory they believe we stole through deception. Darius met Kael's eyes. They're not entirely wrong. What do you mean? The border disputes Magnus used to justify military buildups. The trade sanctions he claimed were defensive. Half of it was manufactured, created to keep both kingdoms on edge and dependent on his council. So we give the territory back. And look weak doing it. Darius shook his head. That's the trap. If we capitulate, every rival pack from here to the coast sees it as surrender. If we fight, we prove Magnus was right about Ironwood being a threat and validate everything he built his power on. There has to be a third option. There is. Darius's voice dropped. We meet them, face to face, alpha to alpha. And we negotiate a new treaty based on truth instead of manipulation. They'll never agree to that. They will if we make them an offer they can't refuse. Before Kael could ask what that meant, the door slammed open. Celine stood in the entrance, still dressed for bed, but with her fighting leathers thrown over the nightclothes. Her expression was pure ice and barely controlled fury. We have a situation, she said. The Ironwood Alpha just sent a messenger. He's demanding Kael be turned over for trial. For what crime? Darius demanded. The assassination of Lord Magnus Reeve. Celine's voice was brittle. He's claiming Kael murdered a sitting council member without trial or due process. That by our own laws, he should face justice in neutral territory. That's insane. Magnus was a traitor. To us. But Ironwood has proof Magnus was secretly advising their council too, playing both sides. And according to them, he was acting under their protection when Kael killed him. The trap closed with perfect precision. Kael felt the walls closing in, understanding flooding through him with terrible clarity. This was never about Magnus. It was about leverage, about forcing the Silver Fang Kingdom into an impossible choice, surrender their prince or go to war. What did you tell the messenger? Darius asked. That we'd deliver our answer at dawn. Celine crossed to the table, studying the maps. But we all know what that answer has to be. We're not handing him over. Then we're going to war. Celine's eyes blazed. A war our depleted forces can't win. A war that will destroy everything we've rebuilt. So we negotiate. With what leverage? Celine slammed her hand on the table. They have us cornered. They know we can't afford to fight. No, we won't sacrifice Kael. So they'll demand concessions, territory, trade rights, political marriages, everything Magnus prevented them from taking for 13 years. The room went silent. Kael looked between his father and Celine, seeing the impossible calculus playing out behind their eyes. Duty versus family, kingdom versus truth. The choice every ruler faced when the costs of principle became too high to bear, and he understood with brutal certainty that there was only one way out that didn't end in catastrophe. I'll go, he said quietly. Absolutely not, Darius snapped. It's the only choice that makes sense. Kael met his father's eyes. I killed Magnus. That's fact. Whether he deserved it or not, whether it was justice or murder, I'm the one who drove the blade home. You were defending yourself. I was executing a traitor. Kael's voice hardened. And if the price of preventing a war is facing trial for that execution, then I'll pay it. They'll kill you, Celine said flatly, put you in front of a tribunal stacked with Magnus's allies and execute you for political expediency. Maybe. Kael straightened. Or maybe they'll give me a chance to speak, to tell the truth about what Magnus did, to expose his manipulation of both kingdoms in front of witnesses who can't ignore it. That's a desperate gamble. We're desperate. Kael looked around the war room, at the maps showing troop movements and supply lines stretched too thin. This kingdom can't survive another war. Not now, not after everything we've been through, so I go. I face their justice, and I trust that truth is still worth something. Darius stared at him for a long moment, pride and terror warring across his face. You sound like your mother, he said finally. Is that a compliment? It's a warning. Darius crossed to the window, looking out over the sleeping kingdom. She believed truth would protect her too, and she died alone in the dark with assassins at her door. But she didn't die silent. Kyle moved to stand beside him. She made sure I knew, made sure the evidence survived, made sure someone would be left to tell the story. And you think that's worth dying for? I think it's worth living for. Kale met his reflection in the glass. And if I have to die to prove it, then at least I'll die as something other than a secret. The conviction in those words seemed to reach something in Darius. He turned, gripping Kael's shoulders. If you do this, he said, if you walk into that tribunal, you do it smart. Not as a victim, not as a defendant, as a prince who has nothing to apologize for. How? By making them prove their case, by forcing them to justify Magnus's actions in front of the entire realm, by turning their trial into an indictment of everything he built. Darius's grip tightened. You want truth to matter. Then make them face it, all of it, until they have to choose between condemning you or condemning themselves. That could backfire. It will definitely backfire. Darius smiled, sharp and cold. But at least you'll go down fighting. Dawn came too fast. Kael stood in formal court attire, the thorn crest prominent over his heart, waiting in the throne room while Darius composed the response to Ironwood's demand. Celine appeared beside him, silent as smoke. This is a mistake, she said without preamble. Probably. Definitely. She studied him with those sharp eyes. You're 14 years old, trained for less than a year, and you're walking into a political arena designed to destroy you. I know. Then why do it? Because someone has to. Kael met her gaze. Magnus spent 13 years making sure no one would challenge him, making sure truth was always less convenient than lies. If I don't stand up now, if I let them use me as a bargaining chip, then everything we fought for means nothing, even if it gets you killed, especially then. Celine was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small vial of dark liquid. Nightshade extract, she said. Fast-acting poison. If the trial goes wrong, if they decide to make an example of you, take this. It's cleaner than what they'll do. Kael stared at the vial. You want me to kill myself. I want you to have control over your own death. Celine pressed it into his hand. That's the only mercy I can offer. He closed his fingers around the vial, feeling the weight of it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Celine turned away. Just survive. And if you can't survive, make sure they regret killing you. Flag. The journey to neutral territory took 3 days. Kael rode with a small escort. Darius, Celine, Captain Rydian, and 6 guards. Not enough to win a fight, but enough to send a message. The Silver Fang Kingdom wasn't surrendering, just negotiating. They met the Ironwood delegation at the border, 20 soldiers flanking an alpha who looked like winter personified, pale, cold, ancient in the way glaciers were ancient. Alpha Morgath. He studied Kael with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall and learned to feel nothing about either. So this is the bastard prince who started a war, he said. I didn't start anything, Kael replied. I just finished what Magnus began. Bold words for a child facing execution. I'm facing trial, not execution. Kael kept his voice steady. There's a difference. Morgath smiled. We'll see. The tribunal convened in an ancient stone hall built on the exact border between Silverfang and Ironwood territory. Neutral ground where neither kingdom held advantage. Inside, representatives from every major pack in the realm waited. Witnesses. Judges. The kind of audience that would make this trial's outcome binding across the entire territory. Kael stood in the center of the hall, hands bound in ceremonial chains while the charges were read. 1 count of assassination of a sitting council member. 3 counts of conspiracy to destabilize diplomatic relations. 7 counts of incitement to violence resulting in the deaths of over 40 soldiers during the fortress assault. The list went on and on. By the time the magistrate finished, Kael was facing enough charges to justify execution 10 times over. How do you plead? The magistrate asked. Kael looked around the hall, at the nobles watching with barely concealed anticipation, at Darius and Celine sitting in the gallery, forbidden from interfering but present as witnesses. at Alpha Morgath sitting in judgment like death itself, and made his choice. Guilty, he said clearly. To all of it. The hall erupted, nobles shouting, magistrates calling for order, Darius half rising from his seat before Selene pulled him back down. Morgath raised a hand and the room fell silent. You confess, he said. I confess to the actions. Kael's voice carried through the hall. I killed Magnus Reeve. I conspired to free my father from unlawful imprisonment. I led the assault on the southern fortress. All of it. Every charge. Guilty. Then this tribunal has no choice but to. But I don't confess to the crimes, Kael cut him off, because those actions weren't criminal. They were justice. The hall went deadly quiet. Explain, Morgath ordered. Magnus Reeve spent 13 years manipulating both our kingdoms, Kael said. He orchestrated my conception to create exactly this crisis. He murdered my mother to silence her. He imprisoned my father on false charges to seize power. And he played your counsel against ours to keep both kingdoms weak and dependent on his counsel. Those are serious accusations. They're documented facts. Kael looked directly at Morgath. And if this tribunal is interested in truth instead of political theater, I can prove every one of them. Morgath leaned back in his seat, something unreadable flickering in his ancient eyes. Very well, he said. Present your evidence. Kael gestured to Rydian, who stepped forward with a leather case containing everything Mara had compiled. Letters, financial records, testimony from survivors of Magnus's manipulations. For the next 6 hours, Kael laid it all out. The affair Magnus orchestrated between Darius and his mother, the blackmail network spanning both kingdoms, the manufactured border disputes designed to justify military buildups, the political marriages forced on unwilling participants, the assassinations disguised as accidents. All of it. Every crime, every manipulation, every life Magnus had destroyed in his climb to power. And with each piece of evidence, Kael watched the nobles' expressions change. Shock, disbelief, slowly dawning horror as they realized how completely they'd been played. Even Morgath looked shaken by the time Kael finished. These records, the Alpha said slowly, if they're authentic. They are. Kael met his eyes. And you know it, because Magnus was advising your council, too, feeding you intelligence about Silver Fang troop movements, recommending policies that kept our kingdoms at each other's throats. He played both sides so perfectly that neither of us realized we were fighting a war he invented. Why, someone called from the gallery. What did he gain? Power. Kael's voice hardened. Pure, absolute power. As long as we were fighting each other, we needed him, depended on him, gave him authority no advisor should ever hold. And if I hadn't killed him, he would still be pulling strings while our kingdoms bled. The hall was silent except for the sound of nobles reassessing 13 years of decisions through this new, terrible lens. Morgath stood slowly. This tribunal will adjourn, he announced, to consider the evidence and render judgment. He walked out, the other judges following, leaving Kael standing in the center of the hall, chains heavy on his wrists, wondering if he just saved his life or guaranteed his execution. They kept him in a holding cell overnight. Not cruel, not comfortable. Just stone walls and a narrow bed and the crushing weight of waiting. Darius came at midnight. The guards let him through without question. Some courtesies transcended politics. He sat on the bench across from Kael, silent for a long moment. You did well today, he said finally. Did I? You turned their trial into an indictment of everyone who enabled Magnus, made them choose between admitting they were manipulated or condemning you for exposing it. Darius smiled slightly. That took courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. Darius leaned forward. The tribunal is divided. Half want to execute you to save face. Half want to pardon you to distance themselves from Magnus's crimes. And Morgath is the deciding vote. Which way will he go? I don't know. Darius's expression was grim. He's old, pragmatic, more interested in stability than justice. And pardoning you creates instability. So I die. Maybe. Or maybe he finds a third option. Darius gripped Kael's shoulder. Either way, you spoke truth to power, made them listen, forced them to see what they'd been ignoring. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. Darius stood to leave, pausing at the cell door. But your mother would be proud. And so am I. Then he was gone, leaving Kale alone with the darkness and the knowledge that tomorrow would either vindicate everything he'd fought for or prove that truth wasn't enough after all. Tick. Dawn brought the tribunal's decision. Kale stood in the center of the hall again, chains removed this time, facing the assembled judges with his head high and his heart hammering against his ribs. Morgath rose from his seat, ancient eyes unreadable. This tribunal has reviewed the evidence, he said, and we find your confession credible. Magnus Reeve was indeed guilty of crimes against both our kingdoms. His death, while extrajudicial, served justice. Relief flooded through Kael so fast he almost collapsed. However, Morgath continued, and the relief turned to ice. The manner of his death creates a dangerous precedent. If we allow royal blood to execute council members without trial, we invite chaos. The hall went silent. Therefore, Morgath said, this tribunal renders the following judgment. Kael Arden is pardoned for the death of Magnus Reeve, but he is exiled from both Silver Fang and Ironwood territories for a period of 5 years. During that time, he will live in neutral lands, without title, without protection, without the privileges of his birthright. No, Darius shouted from the gallery. You can't. It is done. Morgath's voice cut through the protest. The boy lives, the kingdoms have peace, and the precedent is clear. Royal blood does not grant immunity from consequence. He looked at Kael. You fought for truth, he said. Now live with what it cost you. The judgment was final, binding, absolute. Kael stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by nobles who wouldn't meet his eyes, and felt everything he'd fought for slip through his fingers like water. He'd survived, but at a price that felt worse than death. They gave him 3 days to prepare. 3 days to say goodbye to a kingdom he'd barely begun to know, to a father he'd just started to understand, to a life that had almost felt like it might be worth living. Celine found him in the palace gardens on the last night, staring at stars he wouldn't see again for 5 years. You could run, she said. Where? Anywhere. Change your name. Disappear. Let the tribunal think you accepted exile. While you build a new life somewhere, they'll never find you. That's not who I am. No. Celine sat beside him on the stone bench. It's not. You're the stubborn bastard who'd rather face consequence than live as a lie. My mother's son. Your father's, too. Celine's voice softened. Darius is devastated. He spent the last 3 days trying to find a legal loophole, a way to overturn the judgment. But there isn't one. I know. Do you also know he's planning to abdicate? Kael turned to stare at her. What? He's going to step down as Alpha King, name me as regent, and spend the next 5 years searching for a way to bring you home. Celine met his eyes. He's willing to give up everything for you. He can't do that. Try stopping him. Celine smiled bitterly. You're his son, his blood, the living proof that he's capable of caring about something more than duty. He's not letting you disappear into exile without fighting for you. But the kingdom needs him. The kingdom needs stability. And right now, Darius staying on the throne while his son is exiled creates exactly the kind of instability Morgath was trying to avoid. Celine stood. So he's making the choice he thinks honors both you and his responsibility. That's not fair to him. Life isn't fair. Celine's voice hardened. It's just what we make of the hand we're dealt. And Darius is dealing with his the only way he knows how, by sacrificing himself so you have a chance. Kael felt tears burning behind his eyes but refused to let them fall. What do I do? He asked. Survive. Celine gripped his shoulder. Survive the exile. Learn. Grow. Become someone who can come back stronger. And when those 5 years are up, you return and claim everything you're owed. And if I can't, then you'll die trying, because that's what it means to be royal blood in a kingdom built on wolves. She walked away, leaving Kael alone with the stars and the crushing weight of a future that stretched like a prison sentence. The morning of his exile, the entire court gathered to witness his departure, not to celebrate, to bear witness. Kael stood in formal travel clothes, a pack with basic supplies at his feet, facing Darius one last time. His father looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. "I'm sorry," Darius said quietly. "I should have fought harder, found a way. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." Darius pulled him into an embrace that felt like drowning and salvation at the same time. 5 years. That's all. And then you come home. If I survive. You'll survive. Darius pulled back, gripping Kael's shoulders. Because you're stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and more dangerous than any of them realize. He pressed something into Kael's hand. A ring, silver and black. The thorn crest etched into the metal. "Your birthright," Darius said. "Wear it. Remember who you are. And come back to claim what's yours." Kael closed his fingers around the ring, feeling the weight of it. "I will," he promised. Celine approached next, her expression carefully neutral but eyes blazing with barely controlled emotion. She handed him a sealed letter. "Don't open it until you reach neutral territory," she said. "But when you do, follow the instructions exactly. I've called in favors, made arrangements. You won't be completely alone. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Celine's voice dropped. "What's coming will test you in ways you can't imagine, break you if you're not careful. But if you survive it, if you come back whole, you'll be unstoppable. Then I'll come back unstoppable." "Good." Celine stepped back. "Because this kingdom is going to need you." The time came. Kael shouldered his pack, took one last look at the palace that had almost become home, and walked through the gates into exile. Behind him, he heard Darius give the order, "Close the gates." And Kael didn't look back as they swung shut with a boom that echoed like a coffin closing. Talk. He walked for 3 days before opening Celine's letter. Inside were coordinates, a name, and a single line of instruction. "Find her. She'll teach you what I couldn't." The coordinates led to a mountain fortress in the far north, the kind of place people went to disappear or to become something else entirely. The name was Mara. Kael smiled despite everything. Celine had sent him back to the woman who'd turned him from prey into predator once before. Time to do it again. The journey took 2 weeks of hard travel through territory that didn't care who he was or what he'd survived. Just another traveler. Another exile. Another person trying to outrun their past. But Kael wasn't running anymore. He was preparing. For the war he knew was coming, because 5 years was a long time. Long enough for kingdoms to forget, for enemies to regroup, for the truth he'd fought so hard to protect to get buried under new lies and old ambitions. But it was also long enough to become exactly what Celine had promised. Unstoppable. He reached Mara's fortress at sunset, exhausted and half-starved and more determined than he'd ever been. She opened the door before he could knock, unsurprised. "Took you long enough," she said. "I got exiled." "I heard." Mara stepped aside, letting him in. "Also heard you tore apart a tribunal and walked away alive." "Impressive." "I didn't walk away. I got thrown out. Same result." Mara closed the door. "You're here. You're breathing, and you're ready to become dangerous. I thought I already was." Mara laughed, sharp and cold. "Child," she said, "you haven't even begun." She led him deeper into the fortress, past training yards and armories and rooms full of weapons he didn't recognize. 5 years, she said. "That's what we have. And by the time those 5 years are up, you're going to be something no one expects. Not a prince, not a warrior. Something new." "What?" Mara stopped at the entrance to a massive underground chamber. Torchlight flickered across walls carved with symbols and histories stretching back centuries. "A king," she said. "The kind who doesn't just inherit a throne. The kind who carves it from the bones of everyone who said he couldn't." She turned to face him, eyes blazing with the same fire he'd seen in Darius, in Celine, in his mother's journal entries. "Welcome to your real education," she said. "Let's see if you survive it." Kael looked around the chamber at the evidence of decades of training and preparation and wolves who'd been forged into weapons, and understood with brutal clarity that exile wasn't punishment, it was opportunity. 5 years to become unstoppable. 5 years to prepare for the war he knew was waiting. 5 years to transform from the bastard prince who survived into the king who conquered. He met Mara's eyes. "When do we start?" he asked. "Now." Mara smiled, sharp as broken glass. And I hope you're ready, because what I'm about to put you through will make everything you've survived look gentle. Bring it. The words hung in the air between them. A promise, a threat, a declaration of war against everyone who'd tried to break him. And as Mara led him deeper into the fortress, into the beginning of a transformation that would shake kingdoms, Kael felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, never peace, but purpose. Cold, clear, absolute. He would survive this exile. He would become unstoppable. And when those 5 years were up, when he walked back through the gates of Silver Fang territory, he would show them exactly what happened when you tried to bury the truth. It came back, sharper, stronger, and hungry for blood. The real war was just beginning. 5 years changed everything. Kael stood at the border of Silver Fang territory on the exact day his exile ended, watching the sun rise over lands he'd been forced to leave as a frightened 14-year-old boy. He was 19 now, and he'd become exactly what Mara promised, something no one expected. The years in her fortress had stripped away everything soft and rebuilt him from the foundations up. Every weakness identified and hammered out through training that made Vera's drills look like children playing at war. Every hesitation burned away in combat that left scars across his body and soul. Every doubt crushed beneath the weight of a singular purpose that had kept him breathing when exhaustion begged him to quit. He'd learned to fight like something born from violence itself. Learned to read politics and power the way predators read prey. Learned that truth without strength was just pretty words waiting to be buried. And he'd learned that the boy who'd walked away from this kingdom didn't exist anymore. That version of himself had died somewhere in the frozen north, broken and remade so many times he'd stopped counting. What stood at the border now was something harder, colder, more dangerous than anyone who'd known the frightened child could possibly imagine. But underneath the armor and the scars and the brutal competence, something else remained. The same stubborn refusal to let lies win, the same desperate need to make his mother's death mean something. The same promise he'd made to return and claim what was his. Some things even 5 years of hell couldn't break. Silas appeared beside him, silent as always. The tracker had stayed with Kael through the entire exile, refusing to leave even when Mara's training nearly killed them both. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Good answer." Silas smiled slightly. "Means you're thinking clearly." They crossed the border as dawn broke fully, two figures walking into a kingdom that had spent 5 years trying to forget they existed. The palace looked exactly the same. Ancient stone walls. Tapestries depicting victories Kael now understood were built on lies and blood. Guards at every entrance who watched him approach with hands on weapons and uncertainty in their eyes. Captain Rydian met them at the outer gate. He'd aged in 5 years. More gray in his hair. More lines around his eyes. The kind of weathering that came from holding a kingdom together while it slowly tore itself apart. "Kael," he said quietly, "welcome home." "Is it home?" "That's what we're about to find out." Rydian gestured them through the gate. "The king is waiting. And I should warn you, things have changed. How bad? See for yourself." They walked through corridors that felt smaller than Kael remembered, past servants who stared with open shock, past nobles who whispered and pointed like he was a ghost returned from the grave. And maybe he was. The boy who'd left this place had been buried 5 years ago in snow and blood, and the crushing understanding that survival required becoming someone else entirely. The throne room doors opened. Darius sat on his throne, crown heavy on his head, looking every day of the 5 years that had passed. Older, more tired, but still carrying himself with the kind of presence that made strong men nervous. Celine stood beside him, Luna crown gleaming, expression carved from ice as always. But her eyes blazed with something that might have been relief or fury or both. And standing at the base of the dais, dressed in formal court attire, with weapons barely concealed beneath expensive fabric, was someone Kael didn't recognize. A woman, early 20s, dark hair pulled back severe, eyes sharp enough to cut, and a smile that promised violence wrapped in political courtesy. She studied Kael like a predator evaluating prey. "So this is the famous bastard prince," she said. "I expected someone taller. Kael met her gaze without flinching. And you are Lady Theron. She inclined her head in a gesture that managed to be respectful and mocking at the same time. Senior advisor to the throne. I took over after Magnus's unfortunate demise. Another vulture circling the corpse, Kael said flatly. The room went silent. Lady Theron's smile widened. I like him already. Enough, Darius said, voice cutting through the tension. Kael, approach. Kael walked forward, boots echoing on stone that had once felt like sanctuary and now felt like a battlefield waiting to erupt. He stopped at the base of the dais, looking up at his father. 5 years, Darius said quietly. You survived. I did what I had to. So did we. Darius gestured around the throne room. The kingdom you left is not the kingdom you're returning to. Magnus's network ran deeper than we knew. It took years to root out all his loyalists. Years of small wars and political purges and alliances that cost more than they should have. But you survived too. Barely. Darius's expression was grim. We lost the Eastern Territories. 3 allied packs broke their treaties. The Ironwood Pack is stronger than ever and watching for any sign of weakness. So my exile accomplished nothing. It kept you alive. Celine spoke for the first time, voice sharp. Which was the point. Magnus wanted you dead. The tribunal wanted you erased. You walked away breathing. That's victory enough, is it? Kael looked around the throne room at the evidence of 5 years of decay and compromise. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the truth I fought for got buried anyway. Not buried, Darius said. Just delayed, convenient, necessary. Darius stood, descending the dais. The kingdom wasn't ready for everything you exposed. Wasn't strong enough to survive the full revelation. So we told them what they could handle and protected the rest until the time was right. And now the time is right. Now you're back. Darius stopped in front of Kael, studying him. And you're not the scared child who left. You're something else. Something that might be strong enough to handle what comes next. Which is war. Lady Theron's voice cut in. The Ironwood Pack is mobilizing again. They've spent 5 years building alliances and waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And your return just gave them the excuse they've been looking for. How? Because you're proof the Silverfang throne is weak. Theron moved closer, circling Kael like she was evaluating his worth. You're the bastard son who got exiled for killing a traitor. The living reminder that this kingdom's strength is an illusion built on secrets. They're going to use you as justification for invasion. Then I'll fight. With what army? Theron stopped in front of him. You have no lands, no title, no legal standing in this kingdom. You're a ghost, a rumor, a convenient symbol with no actual power. Then give me power. The words came out before Kael could stop them, hung in the air like a challenge. Darius and Celine exchanged glances. That's why you're here, Darius said finally. Not for a reunion, for a choice. What choice? Darius pulled a document from his jacket, unfolding it on a nearby table. Formal declaration of legitimacy, he said. Signed by every remaining member of the council, acknowledged by our allied packs, binding under the old laws. One signature and you're no longer the bastard prince. You're heir to the Silver Fang throne. Kael stared at the document, at his name written in formal script beneath titles he'd never thought he'd claim. What's the cost? He asked. Everything. Celine moved to stand beside Darius. You sign that document, you're committing to this kingdom, to its wars, its politics, its endless cycle of violence and compromise. No more exile, no more running. You're bound here until you die or the kingdom falls. And if I refuse, then you walk away. Darius's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. You disappear into whatever life you built in the north, and we face Ironwood without you. You'd lose. Probably. Darius met his gaze. But that would be our choice, our consequence, not yours. The honesty in those words hit harder than any weapon. Kael looked at the document, at Darius and Celine standing together despite everything, at Lady Theron watching with those calculating eyes, at the throne room that had almost become home before exile tore it away. And he thought about the boy who'd arrived here 5 years ago, desperate and alone and certain that truth would be enough. That boy had been wrong. Truth without power was just noise waiting to be silenced. But power without truth was Magnus. Was corruption wearing a crown? Was everything Kyle had fought against? The balance between them. That was the real challenge. That was what separated kings from tyrants. "Where do I sign?" he said. The ceremony happened at sunset. Not a public coronation, just the council and a handful of witnesses who'd earned the right to see this moment. Kyle stood before the throne, formal court attire feeling like armor, as Darius read the declaration. "By the authority of the Silverfang throne and the witnessed acknowledgement of this council, I hereby recognize Kyle Arden as legitimate royal blood, heir to this kingdom, bound by duty and protected by law." He drew his blade, the same one Mira had given him decades ago. "Kneel." Kyle knelt. The blade touched his shoulder, cold and certain. "You came to us as a secret," Darius said. "You fought as a warrior. You survived as an exile. And you return as a prince." He moved the blade to the other shoulder. "But more than that, you return as someone who understands what truth costs, what power requires, what duty demands." Darius sheathed the blade, offering his hand. "Rise, Prince Kyle, and show this kingdom what you've become." Kale took the hand, rose, and faced a council that had no choice but to acknowledge what he'd earned through blood and exile and the stubborn refusal to stay buried. Maikem. The war came 3 weeks later. Ironwood crossed the border with 6,000 soldiers, claiming self-defense against Silverfang aggression. Lies built on Magnus's old manipulations. Propaganda designed to justify conquest. Kale stood on the battlements beside Darius, watching the enemy army approach like a tide of steel and fury. "This is what you signed up for," Darius said quietly. "I know. Second thoughts." "None." Kyle checked his weapons, the blades Mara had forged for him during 5 years of brutal preparation. "This was always coming. At least now I get to face it instead of running." "You could still run." Darius met his eyes. "Take Silas, disappear into the north. Let me handle this. We both know how that ends." "Yes." Darius smiled, sharp and bitter. "With me dead and the kingdom burning, which is why I'm grateful you're here." They stood in silence, watching the army draw closer. "When this is over," Kyle said, "when we've survived whatever's coming, I want to know about her, really know. Not just the legend or the journal, but who she was before Magnus twisted her into a weapon." Darius was quiet for a long moment. "She loved thunderstorms," he said finally. "Used to stand in the rain and laugh while everyone else ran for cover. That it made her feel alive, like the world was bigger than the small space she occupied in it." "That sounds like her." "She was fearless, stubborn, too kind for her own good." Darius's voice cracked slightly. "And she deserved better than me. She got me." Kyle met his father's eyes. "And I'm still here, still fighting, so maybe that's better than nothing. It's everything." Darius gripped his shoulder. "And I'm going to make sure you survive to see what comes after this war. We both survive. Or neither of us does. Deal." The battle began at dawn. Ironwood hit them hard and fast, trying to overwhelm the defenses through sheer numbers. But Kyle had spent 5 years learning to turn disadvantage into strength, to read terrain and exploit weakness, to fight like someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. He led the defense of the eastern wall, Silas at his side, cutting through enemy soldiers with the kind of brutal efficiency that made veterans nervous. This was what Mara had forged him into, not just a warrior, a weapon. The battle raged for 3 days. No clear victor, no decisive moment, just endless waves of violence that ground both armies into bloody exhaustion. On the third night, as casualties mounted and supplies ran low, Alpha Morgath himself rode to the gates under flag of truce. Kyle met him there, Darius and Selene flanking him. The ancient Alpha studied Kyle with those cold eyes. "You've grown," he said. "I had 5 years." "And you use them well." Morgath dismounted, moving closer. "Well enough that this war has cost me more than I anticipated. More than it's worth. Then withdraw. I will, under one condition. Name it." "You." Morgath gestured to Kyle. "Single combat, you and my champion. Winner takes the disputed territories. Loser withdraws and acknowledges the victor's claim." That's not how wars work, Celine said. It is when both sides are bleeding and neither can afford to lose. Morgath's gaze never left Kael. Your prince wants to prove himself, wants to show this kingdom he's more than a bastard who got lucky. Here's his chance. Who's your champion? Kael asked. My daughter. Morgath smiled. The one I told you about 5 years ago, the one who ran rather than accept my political marriage. She came back, and she's been waiting for a chance to make me proud. Why would she fight for you? Because I'm dying. Morgath's voice was steady. Cancer. 6 months, if I'm lucky. And she wants to prove she can lead when I'm gone, wants to earn the pack's respect through victory. So this is a test, for both of you. Morgath stepped back. Tomorrow at dawn, the valley between our camps, your lives and your kingdoms riding on who's strong enough to survive. Kael looked at Darius. Your choice, his father said. But choose wisely. This ends with blood either way. Then I choose to control whose blood gets spilled. He turned back to Morgath. Tomorrow at dawn, he agreed. And when I win, you withdraw permanently. No more border disputes, no more manufactured conflicts. Clean slate. Agreed. Morgath mounted his horse. And when my daughter wins, you acknowledge that truth without power is meaningless. That your 5 years of exile taught you nothing. Then I guess we'll find out tomorrow. The valley was silent as death when Kael arrived, empty except for witnesses from both armies lining the ridges, watching, waiting to see which kingdom would walk away and which would burn. Kael stood in the center, weapons ready, as Morgath's champion entered from the opposite end. She was nothing like he expected, smaller than him, faster, scarred from battles he could only imagine, and carrying herself with the kind of confidence that came from knowing death intimately and learning not to fear it. She stopped 10 feet away. I'm Astrid, she said, and I'm going to kill you. You can try. I will. Astrid drew her blades, twin daggers that caught the morning light. Because unlike you, I've spent the last 5 years earning my place, not hiding in exile, not running from consequence, fighting, bleeding, proving I deserve to lead. I wasn't hiding. No, you were being protected. Astrid circled him. Protected by a father who loves you. Protected by a kingdom that gave you a second chance. I had to carve my place from people who wanted me dead. Then we're the same. We're nothing alike. Astrid's eyes blazed. You're the bastard prince who got lucky. I'm the unwanted daughter who made her own luck. She attacked. Fast. Brutal. Every move precise and deadly. Kael barely blocked the first strike, feeling the impact rattle through his bones. The second came before he could recover, forcing him back. This wasn't like sparring with Mara. This was someone fighting for survival, for legacy, for the right to exist in a world that wanted her erased, just like him. The realization hit mid-combat, making him hesitate for a split second. Astrid's blade opened a cut across his ribs, shallow but painful. Focus, she hissed, or die. Kael stopped thinking and started fighting the way Mara taught him, not with strategy, with instinct, with the understanding that combat was just controlled chaos, and the winner was whoever could ride the chaos longest without breaking. They clashed in the center of the valley, blades screaming, both bleeding, both refusing to quit. The fight went on for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, neither gaining advantage, neither willing to yield. Until Kael saw the opening, a fraction of hesitation as Astrid favored her left leg, an old injury never fully healed. He could exploit it, end this, win the territories and send Ironwood home in defeat. But he thought about his mother, about the choices Magnus had forced on her, about spending 13 years as a weapon in someone else's war, and made a different choice. He dropped his guard. Astrid's blade stopped an inch from his throat. What are you doing? She demanded. Refusing to be Magnus, Kael said, refusing to win through exploiting weakness, refusing to perpetuate the same cycle that killed my mother. Then you're a fool. Maybe. Kael met her eyes. But I'm a fool who's tired of fighting wars built on old grudges and older lies. So here's my offer. We both walk away. Both our kingdoms acknowledge this was a draw, and we figure out how to build peace instead of victory. Astrid's blade didn't move. My father is dying, she said quietly. If I don't win this, If I don't prove myself, the pack will tear itself apart fighting over succession. Then prove yourself differently. Kale slowly raised his hands. Show them you're strong enough to choose peace when war would be easier. Show them you're more than just another conqueror. That's not how wolves think. Then maybe it's time we taught them. The blade trembled, then lowered. Astrid stepped back, sheathing her weapons. You're insane, she said. Probably. Kale smiled. But I'm also the bastard prince who survived 5 years of exile and came back stronger. So maybe insane works. She studied him for a long moment, then held out her hand. Alliance, she said. Not surrender. Not victory. Just 2 kingdoms agreeing to stop bleeding each other dry. Kale took the hand. Alliance. The valley erupted, soldiers from both sides shouting, some in approval, some in fury. But the witnesses had seen. The combat was over, and neither kingdom had lost. The treaty negotiations took 3 months. Brutal. Exhausting. Every old grievance dragged into the light and examined until both sides were sick of their own history. But eventually, they found common ground. Territory adjustments, trade agreements, a mutual defense pact against external threats. And something else, something Kyle hadn't expected, a marriage alliance. Not forced, not political manipulation. Just Astrid looking at him across the negotiation table one night and saying, "You know this would solve a lot of problems. It would create new ones." True, but at least they'd be our problems. Astrid leaned back. My father dies in 4 months. Your kingdom is barely holding together. An alliance through marriage gives both our people stability. That's cold. That's pragmatic. Astrid met his eyes. And after watching you fight, after seeing you choose peace over victory, I think I could do worse. Is that a proposal? It's an acknowledgement of reality. Astrid stood. Think about it. We have time. But they didn't. Morgath died 6 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, and the Ironwood pack immediately fractured into factions. Astrid held them together through sheer force of will and the marriage alliance she announced the day after her father's funeral. The wedding happened at the border, neutral ground where both kingdoms could witness. Kyle stood in formal attire that felt like armor, watching Astrid approach in traditional Ironwood ceremonial dress, and thought about how far he'd come from the frightened child who'd arrived at palace gates in a storm. That boy had been looking for a father. This man was choosing a partner. The difference mattered. They exchanged vows in front of witnesses from both kingdoms. Promises built on pragmatism and respect, and the understanding that sometimes survival required setting aside pride. And when it was done, when the treaty was sealed and the alliance formalized, Kyle looked at Astrid and saw something unexpected. Not love, not yet, but potential. The kind that came from 2 people who'd survived hell separately and decided surviving together might be worth trying. 1 year after the wedding, Kyle stood in the palace gardens at sunset, watching his son take his first steps. The boy was barely a year old, dark hair like his mother, eyes like Kyle, stubborn as both of them combined. Astrid sat on a bench nearby, watching with the same calculating expression she brought to everything. But there was warmth there, too, hidden beneath the armor, growing slowly like trust earned through small moments. He's going to be trouble, she said. He's our son. Of course he is. Fair point. Astrid stood, moving to stand beside Kyle. Your father wants to see you. Something about succession planning. Already. He's not getting younger. And with Ironwood and Silver Fang formally unified, someone needs to actually rule the combined territories. Someone meaning me. Someone meaning us. Astrid met his eyes. I didn't marry you to be a decorative Luna. I married you to build something that lasts. And if I'm not ready, then you better get ready fast, because the world doesn't wait for princes to find their courage. She walked away, leaving Kyle alone with his son and the crushing weight of futures built on foundations he was still learning to trust. Darius appeared a few minutes later, moving slowly, age finally catching up to him. You wanted to see me, Kyle said. I want to give you something. Darius pulled a leather journal from his jacket. Your mother's, the complete version. Everything she wrote from the moment we met until the day she died. I thought I'd read it. You read what I could bear to share. Darius pressed the journal into Kael's hands. This is everything. The good, the ugly. The truth I was too ashamed to face. Why now? Because you're about to become a father in truth, not just biology. And fathers need to understand the weight of their choices. Darius's voice cracked. I failed your mother. Failed you. Spent 5 years trying to make it right and barely scratched the surface. Don't make my mistakes. How do I avoid them? By being present. By choosing your family when duty demands otherwise. By understanding that crowns are temporary, but the people you love are forever. Darius gripped Kael's shoulder. You're going to be a better king than I ever was, because you learned what power costs before you ever wore the crown. I learned what truth costs. Same thing. Darius smiled. And that's why you'll survive what's coming. What's coming? Everything. Darius looked out over the kingdom. Wars, betrayals, moments where you have to choose between what's right and what's necessary. But you'll have Astrid. You'll have your son. And you'll have the truth you fought so hard to protect. Will that be enough? It has to be. Because it's all any of us get. He walked away, leaving Kael alone with the journal and a son who wouldn't remember this moment, but would inherit everything it represented. But that night, Kael read his mother's journal, cover to cover. Every page, every word, every moment of love and regret and desperate hope that her son would survive what she couldn't. And on the last page, written the day before she died, he found the entry that broke him. I don't know if Kael will ever read this. Don't know if he'll survive long enough to understand, but if he does, if he's reading these words, then he made it. He survived. And that's all I ever wanted. Not power. Not legacy. Not revenge for everything that was taken from us. Just survival. Just the chance to become something more than the secret that nearly destroyed him. So Kael, if you're reading this, know that I loved you. Every moment. Every sacrifice. Every year spent hiding and running and pretending we didn't exist. I would do it all again. Because you were worth it. And whatever you become, whatever choices you make, whatever crown you wear or refuse, you'll always be my son. The boy who survived. The man who chose truth over comfort. Make it count. Make every breath, every battle, every moment of pain and triumph mean something. And when you're old and tired and wondering if any of it mattered, remember that you existed, that you fought, that you refused to let lies win. That's enough. That's everything. Live well, my son, and never apologize for surviving. Kael closed the journal, tears streaming down his face, and felt something inside him finally heal. Not completely, never completely, but enough. Enough to face tomorrow, to raise his son, to build a kingdom that valued truth over power and strength over cruelty, enough to be the man his mother believed he could become. Ah, mates. 10 years later, Kael stood before the combined councils of Silver Fang and Ironwood, crown heavy on his head, son standing beside him. The boy was 11 now, old enough to understand, old enough to learn. This is where it all started, Kael said, gesturing around the throne room, a frightened child arriving in a storm. Secrets that nearly destroyed everything, a kingdom built on lies. And this is where it ends, Astrid added, standing at his other side. Not with more secrets, not with more manipulation, but with truth, however uncomfortable, however difficult. She pulled out a document, formal historical record, everything Magnus had done, everything they'd uncovered, everything future generations needed to know. We're making this public, she said, teaching it in every territory. So no one forgets what happens when power matters more than truth. The councils erupted in protest, nobles shouting about stability, about reputation, about the danger of admitting past sins. Kael let them shout, then raised his hand and the room fell silent. My mother died because someone thought secrets were more important than lives, he said quietly. My kingdom nearly burned because lies felt safer than truth. And I spent 5 years in exile learning that power without honesty is just tyranny with better marketing. He looked around the room, meeting every noble's eyes. So here's what's going to happen. We tell the truth, all of it. And we teach our children to value honesty over comfort, to choose courage over convenience, to build kingdoms that can survive daylight. And if that makes us look weak, one noble challenged, then we'll be weak together. Kael's voice hardened. but we'll be honest. And history will remember us for what we actually were instead of the lies we told ourselves. The vote was close, but it passed. And 3 months later, the truth became public record, available to anyone who wanted to learn, taught to every child who needed to understand. The kingdom didn't collapse, didn't fall apart, just grew stronger through the uncomfortable process of facing its own history. Ijechets. 20 years after arriving at the palace gates in a storm, Kael stood in the same gardens where he'd once watched his son take first steps. His son was a man now, training to rule, learning the balance between truth and power, making his own mistakes and learning from them, just as it should be. Astrid found him there, gray starting to thread through her dark hair, scars earned through 2 decades of ruling visible on her hands. Thinking about the past, she asked, thinking about how far we've come. We, she smiled. That's new. You used to resist that word. I used to resist a lot of things. Kael took her hand. Then I learned that surviving alone just means dying slowly. When did you get philosophical? Around the same time I realized I actually loved you. Astrid laughed, sharp and genuine. Took you long enough. Some things are worth waiting for. They stood in silence, watching the sun set over a kingdom that had been broken and rebuilt so many times the cracks were part of its foundation now. Do you think it was worth it? Astrid asked. Everything you went through, everything you sacrificed. Kael thought about his mother, about Darius and Celine, about 5 years of exile and the boy who died in the frozen north so a man could be born. Yes, he said finally, because I'm still here, still fighting, still refusing to let lies win. That's not much of a legacy. It's enough. Kael met her eyes. And it's more than most people manage. They walked back to the palace together, hand in hand, as darkness fell and the kingdom settled into another night of fragile peace, earned through blood and truth and the stubborn refusal to quit. Behind them, in the gardens, a stone monument stood. Simple, unadorned, just 2 names carved into granite. Mira Arden, mother, truth-teller, survivor. Magnus Reeve, traitor, manipulator, warning. And beneath both names, a single line that captured everything the kingdom had learned. Some secrets destroy, some truths heal. Choose wisely. Kael looked back at the monument one last time, then turned away. The past was carved in stone, but the future was still being written, and he had work to do.